C'est avec un grand plaisir.
It is a real pleasure for me to welcome you here to this third session of the COSAC. This is the beginning of our second working day. This particular session focuses on a crucial subject for the future of the EU, open strategic autonomy. Open strategic autonomy is a key concept which guarantees the EU's ability to act in an autonomous way while at the same time promoting cooperation where possible. This is a smart approach which contains management of the supply chain as well as economic and geopolitical considerations. Our strategic autonomy is something that we saw in certain crucial situations such as the COVID-19 pandemic or the Russian invasion of Ukraine. These events showed the vulnerability of our economy. I think it was made clear, and it showed us how much we needed to invest in other strategic areas so that we will be less dependent on other countries. The open strategic economy brings together security and competitiveness while at the same time bearing in mind the challenges offered by the green and digital transitions. The EU needs to be able to act to guarantee its future ability to act independently while at the same time not giving in to protectionism nor giving up its values, its fundamental values of competitiveness, sustainability and cohesion. In order to have more in-depth discussions on this important subject, today we have the pleasure of having three important speakers. So first of all, we have Commissioner Nicolas Schmit, the Commissioner for Employment and Social Affairs, who will talk to us about the social dimension of strategic autonomy. Next, we have Mr. Thierry Breton, who is the European Commissioner for the Single Market, who will talk to us about how Europe can strengthen its competitiveness while at the same time preserving its strategic autonomy. And finally, we will have Mr. Malek Houdon, who is a professor from the Solvay Brussels School of Economics and Management at the ULB, and he will talk to us about the challenges and opportunities that are related to the green and digital transition in the context of strategic autonomy. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I am convinced that the contributions of our participants today will help to enrich our debates and help to define a clear strategic focus for the future of the EU. I hope you will actively participate in the discussions and share your ideas. Before I give the floor to Commissioner Schmit, let me just present him briefly. He studied French literature and got a PhD in international economic relations. Nicolas Schmit worked in the civil service in his native country of Luxembourg in 1998. He took up work in the Luxembourg Perm Rep for a period of 6 years. In 2004, he was named the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Immigration. From 2009 to 2018, he was Minister for Work and Employment within the Luxembourg government. Following his election in May 2019 to the European Parliament, he was nominated as European Commissioner for Employment and Social Rights beginning in December 2019. Dear colleagues, you can now ask for speaking time during the debate, which will take place after the presentations from our three key speakers following the same pattern as yesterday. So, Commissioner Schmit, you have the floor for about 10 minutes.
Merci, monsieur.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us to present this important topic, which is open strategic competitiveness in a context which is obviously has changed during the last years fundamentally. Not just we started this commission with a major project, which was the green transition, imposed by the reality and the urgency of climate change, but also we are in the midst of a fundamental technological transformation, especially in the area of digital and now in the area of artificial intelligence. And as a Commissioner of Employment and Social Rights, it is important to adapt our social model to these fundamental transformations. At the same time, the Commission experienced the first pandemic since decades in Europe. And our response to the pandemic was to compensate the economic downturn, which was fundamental, which was extremely important, and trying to preserve the social fabric in our member states. And we did that with two important programs. First, the program SURE, which consisted in expanding to all the member states the support to short-time work schemes, which allowed millions of people to keep their jobs, but not only workers, but also companies who survived thanks to 100 billion that were invested in preserving jobs. And not only jobs, especially also the skills of people. Otherwise, Europe would have had a massive unemployment problem. But then also with Next Generation EU, we continued in supporting our economies, and especially also to mitigate the socio-economic consequences of the crisis, and we set the conditions to boost reforms and investments needed for the green and digital transitions. Now it's time to take a longer-term perspective and focus on Europe's competitive future in an increasingly fraught global economic and geopolitical landscape. This requires us to reflect on how to preserve our strengths and address also our weaknesses. We want Europe to lead the clean tech industrial revolution, but I'm sure Commissioner Breton will very much deal with these aspects, competing with other industrial nations such as the US and China, while protecting its unique socio-economic model. And it is very clear that we will only be successful on transforming our economy if we are able to transform our economic base, and I mean especially our industrial base, and at the same time also to preserve the social context in which our citizens are living. So we need the transformation, a just transition which combines industrial policies, economic policies, but also social policies. We have once-in-a-generation opportunity to secure the EU's industrial lead. For our companies and people, it means turning skills into quality jobs and innovation into mass production, because the key of this transformation finally are with people's skills. That's the case for the green technologies. We have the new green jobs. We have the green skills, which are underdeveloped, unfortunately, and which do not allow us to speed up and to scale up the green transition as we would like. And on the other hand, we have the digital revolution, which now extends to all sectors. And that's one of our major challenges, to promote and develop green skills. So technology goes together with people. And that's finally also the issue of the strategic autonomy. So we have to prepare our workforce to this new context in order to be able to adapt to this new European approach to the global economy. The European Pillar of Social Rights Action Plan and its 2030 headline targets on employment and skills are very much in synchrony with these efforts. The 2020 European Skills Agenda and the European Year of Skills were launched to address the huge skills mismatch in the EU. There There is only one way out. We need to train people much more and in a targeted way. The Porto Skills target of 60% of adults in training by 2030 may look ambitious compared to the current status quo, but it is essential, and I would say it's insufficient. We have to promote lifelong learning, which is one of the major ideas also of former President of the Commission, Jacques Delors, to all sectors and to a majority of workers. Schemes for individual learning accounts empower individuals and can strongly promote participation. The Commission is developing a simplified financing model to support Member States use the European Social Fund Plus for this purpose. The closing event of the European Year of Skills on April 24 is called What Next? And will be the final episode of a rich 12-month discussion with social partners and stakeholders. And I want absolutely to stress the importance of the Skills Pact. A few days ago, we presented the Skills Pact, which brings together more than 1,500 stakeholders from industry, from other economic sectors, from service sectors, but also regions, member states, and skills providers to cooperate and to prepare reskilling and upskilling schemes. We have up to now reskilled about 3.5 million people thanks or in the framework of the Skills Pact. An action plan to tackle labour and skills shortages prepared in close cooperation with social partners, and the action plan identifies more than 60 actions that should be taken to tackle labour and skills shortages in 5 key policy areas: supporting the activation of underrepresented people, providing support for skills development, improving working conditions, improving fair intra-EU mobility for workers and learners, and attracting talent from outside the EU. The effective implementation of the action plan requires a whole-of-government approach at EU and national level in close cooperation with social partners. Our answer to the labour and skills shortages and mismatches, therefore, should lead to full employment and an inclusive labour market. It is absolutely important to tackle the skills shortages because for many companies now, skills shortages are the major obstacle to promote the renovation, the restructuring, the modernization, be it in industry, be it in services, be it also in public services. We have major skills shortages in public services or in social services like care or health. We also want to safeguard and build on the single market, including on its social dimension that will allow for all citizens to benefit from the integration. That's why intra-EU labour mobility is at the heart of the single market, and fair mobility is essential to manage the economic recovery. Finally, the restructuring process may affect whole sectors or clusters of companies and thus contribute to a local or regional concentration of social challenges and tensions. We need to support workers in the job-to-job transition with adequate tools and resources. That's why we need to reinforce also the instruments to promote these transitions, and I think that the transition facility, which has been put into place and which is centered especially to those regions which are affected by these transitions, like the coal regions, has to enlarge to other sectors which are affected by the same or similar changes. That's why we need a combination of regional, industrial and social policies that can avert downward local spirals and promote fair and socially responsible transitions. We have the highest social and labour standards in the world. We have to keep them because we are, for demographic reasons, the country which is in need of workers. So we have to make sure that the working conditions are up to the best standards. On the other hand, Europe stays attractive for companies willing to invest and provide more and better jobs, and I think this should be, in this period of big changes, our major objectives. I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Merci, Monsieur le Commissaire européen. Passons maintenant, si vous le voulez.
Thank you very much, European Commissioner. We'll move on to the second speaker now. Thierry Breton was an engineer who started out in the sector of new technologies. He worked with SMEs and wrote science fiction novels. He was involved in Futurescope, a park for scientific tourism and technology, 1986 to 1990. He was in regional government and then vice president of the Poitou-Charentes region. He led a number of large companies in the IT and new technology sector. In 2005, he became Minister of the Economy and Finance and Industry in France until 2007. After his period as a minister, he taught governance at the Harvard Business School in Boston. In 2019, he became European Commissioner for the Single Market, dealing with industry, services, digital, defence and space, as well as tourism and the audiovisual sector. Commissioner Breton, you have the floor for 10 minutes.
Eh bien, merci beaucoup, mesdames.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, along with Nicola Schmidt, I'm delighted to be here today in the COSAC plenary to talk about strategic autonomy. I'm going to try and tackle the issue from a different angle from Commissioner Schmidt and look at it in terms of jobs, industry, high-quality jobs. And with Nicola, we've got a compass. We want to head towards a more competitive and more autonomous Europe, one that creates quality jobs. And between the social training side, represented by him, and the industrial side, I can say, Mr. President, that we form a very good team, working hand in hand. We've shown it in the past, and we are going to continue to show it in the future, Nicola. So, this strategic autonomy is a crucial issue. It's significant for us because without autonomy we can't achieve our ambitions, we can't prosper, can't protect ourselves. But strategic autonomy doesn't mean protectionism. It means being fully aware of what our strengths are, how to take advantage of them, how to say to all who want to benefit from the biggest internal market in the world, the European one, that they would be welcome to work with us, but there are conditions to be fulfilled. You can't just waltz in to the internal market. There are quality conditions, competitiveness conditions, and henceforward resilience conditions too. So, as Nicola said very clearly, we've had these various shocks which we've survived. Shocks to the internal market, which have affected our fellow citizens. Nicola mentioned the COVID crisis. We succeeded when everyone was closing off. We opened up our value chains again, and we also, I'm thinking of the USA, we got through to them when value chains needed to be open so that our companies needed to be able to export vaccine components, etc. That was all necessary. We got it done. We were at the heart of the plan to vaccinate not just our own citizens but 100 other countries as well, because it allowed us not simply to respond to the problems that our fellow citizens were facing, but also to learn and move forward. So, saying this very clearly, Europe will remain open to the world. It's part of our DNA. But there are conditions. Social conditions, environmental conditions, industrial conditions and resilience conditions too. That's what industrial policy is for. And there are these two legs, if you like, which Nicholas and I were in charge of. Having said that, there's a question of competitiveness. Competitiveness is a hugely important subject. I'll come back to it in a bit. But there are three areas in particular which are more and more important and more interleaved. Production capacity, first of all. Nicola, we're a long way from a world of factory-free industry. That's not happened. We're in favour of industry with factories, and in Europe, not just Europe of course, but certainly in Europe, because more and more production capacity needs to be also found in research centres, application centres, and that's an issue I'm going to come back to in a while. Secondly, economic security, making our supply chains secure. That's a geopolitical aspect, the value chains I was talking about before, and also our industry, our defence industry. Geopolitics means that's vital. When it comes to production capacity, it's something that I think everyone's familiar with all this factory-free Europe business, but there's been a huge change in industry, particularly the digital environment and more interactions with that. It means that the areas of production, look at semiconductors, there's virtually no product that doesn't have semiconductors in it now. So we need to design apps, software, so they can be integrated, can interact with the digital environment, the area where they're designed to produce the services we expect from them. So there needs to be nearness, a proximity, and that's something which we've made progress on with the CHIPS Act. It's more acceptable if we depend to the Asia-Pacific region to the tune of 80%. That's not on. So we've got the CHIPS Act. That's why we voted it through, the two arms of the legislature, and it's allowed us to have now 100 billion euros of investment in Europe when it comes to semiconductors. We've got more than 67 factories under construction. We've now taken the destiny back into our own hands, the goal being by the end of the decade that we'll make 20% of world chips demand. It's very important that we're repatriating that, we're reindustrialising in this vital sector. We're doing the same thing with clean tech, and the Mirror Regulatory Act, if you like, is just like the CHIPS Act with the Net Zero Industry Act. We're also trying to improve what's in our toolbox with strategic alliances with all of the main stakeholders in various areas to allow these stakeholders to think together. When I say stakeholders, or I'm talking about the unions, employees, clients, users, everybody who contributes to the manufacture of products. We did it with batteries, with solar panels, now small nuclear reactors, SNRs. We've seen these recently even here in Brussels, and a hugely important thing is digital sovereignty, and the fact that in the last 4 years we finally managed to lay the foundations for a digital internal area, a digital market with a certain number of rules which will allow us to organise it. We won't have 27 regulators with the DSA. It's just going to be one regulating all 27. We better protect our children with the DMA. Similar thing, but we'll stop the tech giants from evicting people from the market. That's what we've done with the Data Act as well. Who does data belong to? It's a kind of black gold now, the fuel of tomorrow's economy. Producing data in one's vehicles. And does it belong to oneself, to your insurer, to the car manufacturer? That's all been clarified. We'll be able to continue innovating in this area in Europe. It's also the case of avoiding significant risks and also benefit from new technologies. We've got another act dealing with that. And we've laid, as I said, the foundations for a digital internal market, which is a very important element in our competitiveness. A point, if I may, also, the fact that something I mentioned frequently. Europe needs to continue. This is vital, a very important area, both to reducing or limiting our asymmetric dependency. We've seen this very clearly with the war in Ukraine, triggered by Vladimir Putin. This dependency is often used as a weapon, hybrid weapon against us. We have to stop being naive. We need to diversify, be prepared in the future. We did this with Russian gas, weaning ourselves off of that. We've got rare earths in China, and also with the Critical Raw Materials Act, we've once again taken initiative and taken our destiny back into our own hands and come up with solutions common to the 27 member states. We need to remain open, but we need to do it smartly. Diversify supply chains, develop strategic partnerships, and also, when it's justified, equip ourselves with tools which allow us to take trade defence measures. Just a few weeks ago, we did this in the rail areas. I won't go into detail about it, but it's, as I said, no more naivety. Make certain we have the means to defend ourselves, and make certain there's always going to be reciprocity when we're dealing with our partners, but also, of course, our competitors. I was mentioning economic security, talking about diversification, but there's also cooperation with our partners. We've got strategic partners when it comes to raw materials. It's on a state-to-date basis. Singapore, Canada, Japan, South Korea, we're dealing with digital issues on them, and the Global Gateway Initiative is something where we're reaching out to partners to the south of us. The third major area, which links with security, is defence, of course. We've launched significant defence initiatives, particularly when it comes to upping our industrial capacity in the defence industry. Europe, once again, needs to take its security into its own hands. We can't wait every 4 years to see what happens on the other side of the Atlantic, so that we just play a kind of heads or tails game with our fellow citizens' safety. We've got alliances. We're proud and we are always loyal to these alliances. Not everybody seems to see them the same way, but one thing that is certain is that we're all aware that for better to... If you want to be prepared for peace, you should prepare for war. That's an old saying. And to supply Ukraine with what it needs, and to increase our own capacity to be a powerful pillar, a European pillar within NATO, we took a decision last week, by the Council to follow the Commission's recommendation on its re-industrialisation programme, upping the capacity of the defence industry in all 27 member states. The final point I wanted to raise briefly is on competitiveness to guarantee strategic autonomy into the future. People often say to me that the European Union's being left behind when it comes to competitiveness by the USA. Obviously, we need to fight when it comes to competitiveness, to stay competitive. Certain analysts have said that GDP in the EU is 83% of that of the United States 10 years ago, and now is only 60% of US GDP today. But all these Cassandras leapt in when they heard that. And let me just say, I was a professor at Harvard myself. I don't want to boast, but the figures are very eloquent. If you're talking about figures, you need to know what figures you're talking about. And the same analysts in between 2000 and 2010 went quiet. They didn't congratulate Europe on outpacing the United States, but the same indicators showed that what was happening. let's look at the Cassandra's favourite thing, the GDP. It moved from 70% in 2000 of US GDP in 2000 to 110% of US GDP in 2008. That's because it's based on current exchange rates. It's not magic. You need to be able to compare these things and follow the way things are changing. And the situation is now parity of purchasing power, PPA. So it's not that I'm happy with this and we think we can rest on our laurels, but the difference between the EU and the USA hasn't changed for decades. That's a fact. It doesn't mean to say we can't improve. But it's remarkable really for two reasons. First of all, the enlargement. The EU during the same period has brought in 13 new member states between 2004 and 2007 when the Eastern European countries came into the EU. So we didn't just manage to integrate those countries, but we also made sure that our global competitiveness, compared with that of the USA in terms of PPA, remained the same. And we also decarbonised, and that's not cheap, decarbonising. Not enough yet, but still we decarbonised significantly. 22% less we've gone down, and the USA has only gone down by 14% in terms of decarbonisation. I'm saying we can't do more and better, we can and will. But when we compare ourselves, there's always these people saying we're rubbish and the United States is much better. That's just not the case. We can always do better. But we need to be confident in ourselves because we know how to do this stuff among the 27. And it needs, of course, to have appropriate money made available if that's going to happen. We've got the digital transition, the green transition. We've got us making sure we look after our security while remaining competitive and forging alliances, attracting investments, making them less risky. We're talking about a lot of money, 100 billion a year for the green transition. We need to invest by 2030. And I think Nicola Schmidt would agree with me. He often has in the past. In Brussels, we want a real paradigm shift, starting with the EU budget. We've got a race for green technology, trading partners who are very aggressive, war on our very doorstep, and competitors working together against us. And at the moment, we're only spending about 1% of GDP, and Nicola is in charge of responding to all that. Finally, our internal market is the driving force for our competitiveness. We need to consolidate that. We need to continue to make sure it's more and more fluid. But we also need to be aware that it's a real multiplying factor for our ambitions and our competitiveness. I'm thinking in particular about the Carbon Border Adjustment Fund. That's vitally important. It's important in terms of the circular economy, public purchasing. That's another strategic multiplier. That needs to be something we look at, but we're not just prices. We need to look at environmental resilience and environmental factors. We need to do better there. That's what I wanted to say, trying to draw up a balance sheet of what's been happening and what we've been doing. Looking forward to the next 5 years, to the next European Commission. We work together a great deal, but we can, I think, be proud of what we managed to achieve together, and together is the key word there. But I think now we have equipped ourselves to rise to the challenges which still await us. There'll be plenty of them, but let's continue along the road we've marked out already. And thanks for using the 17 minutes that you gave.
Merci pour ce message. Et...
Well, thank you very much indeed, Commissioner. Thank you for that message. And thank you for your words of encouragement as well. Now, to conclude our opening keynote speeches, I'd like to give the floor to Professor Marek Houdon, who studied sciences and philosophy and obtained a doctorate in economics and management, and since 2008 he has been teaching at a number of different universities in Belgium and France, with a particular interest in sustainable finance, social innovation, and ethical resilience. Marek Udon is co-president of the High Committee for Just Transition and also on the board of Finance Watch. Thank you very much indeed for being here, and over to you for 10 minutes.
Bonjour à tous, bonjour à toutes, mesdames, messieurs.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here with you this morning. I've been asked to talk about resilience and competitiveness in the context of strategic autonomy in Europe. So, what are the measures that we should be taking? I could give you an answer in 3 parts. First of all, we need to talk about the notion of strategic autonomy. Secondly, we need to look at the link between competitiveness and resilience. And thirdly, we have to look at financing these policies. First of all, any autonomy needs to be take the form of diversification. So we need to relocate certain value chains, but also take advantage of economies of scale and seek added value and environmental values as well. Now, we all know what the main factors are, and the energy costs and everything that has fed into the strategic autonomy agenda. Now, we should be careful not to move towards a closing of the economy or a turning in on ourselves. So the burning issue is a question around a real issue. So we need to talk about opening not only in economic terms. Moreover, some are concerned about a lack of democracy and in the context of these policies. Now, if we were to move towards a new form of government, then that's good, but we would need more citizens' participation. It's not a waste of time, and it's not a utopia either. But it brings European institutions back closer to European citizens. Secondly, the cost of electricity, administrative burden and costs. Well, of course, we have to listen to businesses in this regard. Competitiveness and resilience need to be on an equal footing. Resilience is an objective, an end in itself. Well, then competitiveness is a means to that end. And since we have an objective at the European level, we need to think about implementing it at the regional level. Now, a number of analyses have shown that European institutions need to deepen their analysis of resilience at the regional level. If you look at urban resilience motors and drivers, they're not the same ones as in rural areas. And these types of analysis would be good to be carried out under structural cohesion and territorial transition plans under the Just Transition Fund. So once again, these would make our policies more coherent. Right now, we have a logic of separation of powers. Competitiveness is often dealt with as a separate unit, just as economic and ecological transition are separate entities. So you might ask, what are the main requirements? Well, the second point is going to deal with competitiveness and resilience. In concrete terms, we need to promote all those areas that are going to have an overall positive impact on all of the aspects that we're interested in. It's difficult to imagine, but it is nevertheless possible. You need to think about the local economic fabric and political stability in order to achieve regional resilience. And that's possible to portray and analyze in quantitative and empirical terms. Those regions that are successful have a strong regional economic tissue that can be mobilized when needed. I'm quite convinced that competitiveness in the medium and long term will lead to greater resilience. When it comes to competitiveness and resilience, those principles apply at the macroeconomic level, but also at the micro level and sectoral level. So, should we take measures to ensure that we promote this kind of resilience and protect certain sectors. Yes, indeed, we should be doing this. Is there a vicious circle? Indeed. An excess of competitiveness. That's going to put additional pressure on natural resources, human resources, and lead to a drop in resilience. So obviously the balance is a delicate one that we need to strike. Thirdly, in all cases, reindustrialization, when we look at the aftermath of the Green Deal and the Social Green Deal 2.0, that will require investment. Let's be clear about this. We shouldn't delude ourselves, and Thierry Breton said this quite clearly. The RRF, which was mentioned also by Commissioner Schmidt, shows that it would be interesting to have major investment policies to promote different policy areas. Many thinkers are worried about a new taxation level at the European level and the measures that would be taken in order to promote such investments. In order to respond to such concerns and worries, I think it's important to be able to answer exactly how such funds will be found for this just transition. Which mechanisms, fiscal or monetary mechanisms, will be put in place to make this possible? That's not clear at this point in time. Furthermore, we need monitoring of the financing mechanisms. How can we ensure that these mechanisms will be scrutinized? We need an annual mechanism for keeping tabs on the financing methods. Well, we're at a turning point in Europe, one of the most complex moments in recent decades. And in order to act wisely, we need to be able to rely on the social fabric. And we know of all the constraints that the industrial sectors face. But if we pull together, we will be stronger. There's no other way. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor, for that very interesting presentation. Dear colleagues, let's move now to our debate. Without further ado, we have 31 speakers who have asked to take the floor, and so you will understand that we need to be very strict in keeping to the allocated speaking time. Just 1 minute per speaker. And please understand if I have to cut you off in order to ensure that everyone can speak, so that nobody is left out. And when I give you the floor, you can switch on your microphone, and then I would ask you to stand, to speak, and to stick to the speaking time. To begin, can I give the floor to Peter Balasha from Hungary, followed by Salvatore Di Meo from the European Union.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm very glad that I can be the very first one to speak. Well, I believe that strategic autonomy based on security and safety. And as for competitiveness, we need safe and secure energy, cheap energy. This needs to be clean energy according to our climate objectives. If we look at clean energy, then we listened to Ursula von der Leyen, who put emphasis on renewable energy and clean energy. Hungary follows the same path, but it builds its capacity on nuclear and solar energy. This leads to strategic autonomy. However, security and safety is of crucial importance. We see what's going on in Europe. Therefore, strategic autonomy is based on security and safety. Thank you very much for your attention.
Merci pour avoir respecté.
Well, thank you for having respected your speaking time. Salvatore De Meo for the European Union.
Ensuite viendra Monsieur Helmut Scholz pour l'Union européenne.
Helmut Scholz will be the speaker after that.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. I listened very carefully to the two commissioners, and I would like to respond partly to them. They often mentioned the need for the EU to equip itself with open strategic autonomy, and that not meaning closing off on ourselves. We need investments to grow the single market so we can untap the potential we've not yet used. When it comes to investments, we need to provide ourselves with about 500 billion euros. So it's not just something that'll call on public resources, it'll have to involve the private sector as well to make sure that we have a public-private partnership which amounts to at least 4% of EU GDP. We talked about SURE, the next generation SURE, which is going to be vitally important. And as chair of the Constitutional Affairs in the European Parliament, I think that no strategic autonomy can happen unless we have a treaty revision, which we've been calling for, particularly involving citizens and companies who are going to be the main, playing a huge part in what we call Europe.
Monsieur Pons pour l'Espagne et ensuite Monsieur Scholz suivra.
Mr. Pons, please.
Sí, gracias, presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair, for giving me the floor. I think in this previous period, from 2019 to 2024, we have done well given the challenges such as Ukraine. Exports have been protected, but I'd like to talk about the situation with regards to democracy. There are a lot of changes that are going on, technological changes, digital changes, changes in defence. We heard from the commissioners who unfortunately couldn't stay to listen to the debate. I think the situation for our populations, for our citizens, they are afraid. So I think it's important that we protect our people. If we don't provide this social Europe, what we will lose is democracy. People will become disappointed and they won't believe it's a fair transition for them. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Scholz.
Thank you. Mr. Scholz is next, followed by Mr. Conde from Spain.
Thank you very much, President. Dear colleagues, I can agree with all what has been said by the commissioners and all the other speakers here that it is a question about socialist and democratic challenges. And the open strategic autonomy, if we are going out of this hemicycle, nobody will understand. If we ask the farmers, what is open strategic autonomy? Probably they can't answer quite directly to this question. So I want to say that is linked to the democratic understanding how we are reflecting the changes and the development in the world. And therefore I guess that the open strategic autonomy is linked that we should not narrow the scope of the strategy, but that we are increasing geopolitical tensions that create blind spots. The risk of environmental degradation for our economies is, in the mid and long term, much higher than political rivalries, and yet is not addressed. So we should be open to our partners in the world, that we are together developing strategies and answers to the challenges of the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Conde Lopez a la parole. Suivra
Mr. Conde Lopez and then Mats Löfström.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you very much. We've spoke about transition, a digital transition that's sustainable, and any transition needs time. So I'm glad that we're placing industry and at the heart of our actions, but we also need to think back to the recent history and learn from that. And in recent years, if you look at decarbonisation, it's actually leaving parts of industry behind, because in some countries it's not easy to achieve this kind of neutrality and to guarantee stable energy prices for industry, which is leading to relocation of industry. So we need to place industry at the heart of our thinking, which means we need to talk about innovation, digital transition. We need to talk about renewable energy. And so the two proposals I would make: the Green Deal needs to serve industry in terms of sustainability and renewable energies. Secondly, the European funds. Some countries are not using European funds as they should. Spain, for example. where reindustrialization is not occurring. And so we have a certain lagging behind when it comes to the implementation of the RRF. So there needs to be a real analysis and evaluation of how things are going and placing industry at the heart of our thinking, and so that the Green Deal can really serve industry and represent a genuine opportunity, which once again serves industry.
Monsieur Löfström.
Mr. Löfström is our next speaker. Then Mr. Gregorich. I beg your pardon, Mr. Van Apeldoorn from the Netherlands.
Mr. President, it is important that we increase Europe's strategic autonomy. What is of utmost importance is that we don't create new problems and decrease the competitiveness of European champions, which would just decrease our strategic autonomy. We need to have a holistic approach. We cannot on one hand say that we are unable to compete with American and Chinese companies, and on the other hand, jeopardizing our own companies that are already world-leading by new EU regulations that would hamper their ability to compete. For example, we should not undermine the patent protection and create new regulatory burden, which would be the result of the proposed Standard Essentials patent regulation. That proposed regulation would have a negative impact on Europe's competitiveness in the development of 5G and 6G technologies that are extremely important to the European Union in developing its strategic autonomy and its global competitive edge in digital technologies, also in a broader security context. Currently, the European Union is one of the global frontrunners in these fields, with two leading global technology companies being European. If we want strategic autonomy, we must not weaken European champions on the global stage by new regulation. We must strengthen them.
Thank you, Monsieur Van Apeldoorn.
Mr. Van Apeldoorn, followed by Mr. Gregorich from Slovenia.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Also in the Dutch Senate, many parties recognise the need to increase Europe's strategic autonomy and resilience, not only vis-à-vis China, but also maybe more generally even towards the US. However, in industrial policy, a strategy for industrial resilience, of enhancing our own productive industrial capacities, is not just about avoiding unwanted, risky dependencies and about green technology, but may be also indispensable for having well-paid and secure jobs, for strengthening our European economy in a way that ensures that the benefits of economic progress are distributed equitably, that our economic progress is socially sustainable. So is strategic autonomy maybe in fact not also an opportunity to strengthen rather than just preserving our European social model? How can we ensure that our industrial policy strategy serves this broader social purpose as well, but it benefits not just businesses but also workers and society at large? These are, I think, important questions as we move ahead with enhancing our strategic autonomy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Monsieur Gregorich. À la parole.
Mr. Gregorich, followed by Ms. Telman from Romania.
Mr. Chairman, let me start with first sentence on the theme of the yesterday, and I regret to see no plan B for Ukraine, no wish for diplomacy. But on the theme of today, definitely we need strategic autonomy, we need diversification of supply chain, we need finally reindustrialization of Europe. We don't want to have closed economy. We should work to have many friends and no enemies. We need much more investment in STEM education, research and innovation, and we must match the USA's support for their industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame Telman pour la.
Ms. Telman from Romania, then Mr. Jarutis on behalf of Latvia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for giving me the floor. In a shifting geopolitical environment, open trade is a key for reducing supply chain dependencies. Important to continue our efforts toward building a resilient network of modern, predictable trade agreements and partnerships, while also reinforcing multilateral cooperation and open trade. This approach would also help the US safeguard its economic weight on the international stage. Romania strongly believes EU competitiveness should rely as much on resilient industrial policy as on a strong internal market. Romania is firmly engaged in the overall effort of pairing competitiveness with the Green Deal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Voilà, Monsieur.
Mr. Jarutis, followed by Mr. Haraka from Finland.
The Russian war of aggression against Ukraine has all painfully reminded us of our economic dependency and how this can be used as a weapon against the EU. We need to be careful about the political decisions that we are making. The EU really needs to think about how it can diversify its economic relations. We need to strengthen supply chains. We need to further develop our independence. From a Lithuanian perspective, we think it is very important that we support these universal fundamental values. That means we need to make it our priority to work with countries that hold the same values as us, that think in the same way. The USA, for example. We also need to look at our strategic autonomy and think about our neighbourhood partnership.
Timo Haraka.
Mr. Haraka, and then Giulio Vigna from Italy will be our next speaker.
And the strategy for economic security published last summer rests on 3 pillars, 3 Ps: protect, promote and partner. Attention has been focused on protecting old industries and critical technologies such as mobile connectivity, quantum computing and cybersecurity. But by definition, critical technology is also the most advanced and competitive technology Europe can offer to others. So if we restrict exporting our best technology to bad guys, we surely need to enhance exporting it to our partners. The flip side of protecting is promoting European excellence in order to not to leave global markets to the Chinese and the US. There cannot be economic security without a strong presence globally. So, dear friends, what Europe is sorely lacking is an export financing instrument. I strongly urge the Member States to prepare it for the next mandate in conjunction with the EIB. We need to incentivise innovations and export excellence in order to restore Europe's relevance in the world economy and global politics. Thank you.
Thank you. Monsieur Giulio Vigna a la parole.
Mr. Giulio Vigna, to be followed by Mr. Breznik on behalf of Slovenia. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, colleagues. Finally, we're hearing people talk about a green transition which respects the social pillar of the European Union and also respects the autonomy strategy that Europe's put together. Let's hope that this isn't just a bit of pre-election rhetoric from the Commission. We need to apply this strategy. We need to apply this idea. The social pillar needs to be regarded as just as important as the environmental one. The fight for a contact and the fight for zero emissions is as important as making a content with no unemployment, and strategic autonomy means certain political choices have to be made. We've got problems, but we've weaned ourselves off in most cases from Russian gas, and we need to become independent from Chinese lithium as well. But that means real deep diversification in terms of our ideas, and the Commission needs to lead the way here. For example, electric cars, they need to put together better regulations on that. That will allow us to get a green transition which bears in mind the social pillar of the European Union. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, colleagues.
Voilà.
Thank you, says the Chairman. Let me give the floor to Mr. Bresnik, and Jean-François Rapin will be on speaker after him.
V luči spremenjenih geopolitičnih sprememb in negotovega mednarodnega okolja je strateška avtonomija Evropske unije.
Well, we have a current international climate that prevents us from implementing strategic autonomy in Europe. But there's no doubt, colleagues, that a concept needs to take into account the real need to defend competitiveness of the European economy. And without this, we would threaten the survival of entire sections of our economy, the automotive sector, for example. I don't think we should overburden sectors with too much regulation. And when it comes to access to raw materials, without guaranteed access, green transition will be difficult. But we've had now for so many decades common agricultural policy, yet farmers are dissatisfied. We've got them protesting outside this room, and they are pointing out the different the incoherence of European policy. You've got imports coming in from third countries that don't have to stick to the same kind of regulation that European farmers are subjected to. So when we think about the green transition, we need to turn that into some green realism, perhaps, so that we're taking into account the real challenges that exist, and if we do that, then we can be pioneers at the international level.
Mr. Rapin.
Depuis hier le montre, la crise de Covid-19.
The debates that we have been having have been really changed by the war in Ukraine. The European Commission from 2019 was supposed to be a geopolitical commission. They were focusing on two major transitions: the green transition to get to carbon neutrality by 2050, and the digital transition, which is key for maintaining European competitiveness in the long term. When it comes to these objectives, we now have to add a caveat due to current events. We have to have a resilient economy through open strategic autonomy. This seems to be a very pertinent concept at the moment, and I think encompasses all of the actions taken by the EU. Measures have been taken in a very short period to effect a very fundamental change in perspective. I think with the upcoming European elections, it is our duty to highlight the challenges that still remain. We have a lot of competitiveness to deal with from USA and China, who have been aggressive. The US with the Inflation Reduction Act. So we have to think about how this would perhaps only worsen if Donald Trump took the presidency. Again, we have to think about de-risking access to raw materials, for example, and we will have to continue this in the next mandate. We have to be careful not to upset key parts of our strategic autonomy. Farmers, fishermen, for example, they want fair rules that are clearly applicable and do not penalise them. That is the real challenge of the Geopolitical Commission. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Parastatidis is our next speaker, then Mr. Ferenczak from Slovakia. Colleagues, the important thing in the autonomy strategy shouldn't just be looked at in terms of defence. There's also an important trade parameter. We've had problems for months during the pandemic, and we couldn't open our borders to trade. So we spotted a weakness there as far as Europe's resilience was concerned. What we need to do is open these trade roads, or make sure they stay open, how we can make sure that we don't trade too much with countries with whom we don't share values. The war in Ukraine has shown the question of autonomy up in a new light. Can we succeed here? Yes, we can. But there is a idea, a parable from Africa. Then there's a fire in a forest. Everybody goes away, or the animals run away, apart from a hummingbird which stays. And it's possible that small countries, Belgium, Estonia, they've got democracy at heart. Greece can do it too. And it's important that we need air and water to survive in this kind of forest. If small countries can do this and stick to our European values.
Monsieur Jan Ferenczak.
Mr. Ferenczak and then Ms. Rijkmans from Belgium. Colleagues, please try to stick to your speaking time.
Dear colleagues, in the context of European Union's open strategic autonomy, enlargement process and energy security are crucial for us. When it comes to the energy security, firstly, we must continue in decreasing our dependence on Russian fossil resources. Secondly, we should strengthen relations with our international partners, diversify energy supplies, and support the renewable energy sources. We believe that the European Union should continue in more resilient, competitive, social and sustainable economy which promotes the well-being of citizens. Furthermore, we believe that it is necessary to continue in the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. It is also very important to strengthen the position of the European Union as a technological powerhouse and a global actor prepared for the global challenges of the 21st century in the context of the emission neutrality. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Madame Hélène Rijkmans.
Ms. Rijkmans for Belgium, and then Mr. Tiefnig from Austria will be our next speakers.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, one thing that is too often forgotten is that we need to take into account foreign interference, and that also applies to critical and strategically important infrastructure. The Belgian Senate has recently adopted a report on this, which will go through plenary very soon. We need a strict framework when it comes to identifying businesses that are working with strategically relevant substances and areas, and we need to identify foreign interference and reduce those risks and threats of foreign interference. And that needs to happen at an international level, but also at a European level. So what are our responses to foreign interference?
Monsieur Tiefnig.
Thank you. Mr. Tiefnig from Austria, and then Ms. Tasser from Slovenia.
Geschätzte Damen und Herren, schon ein Schiff im...
Ladies and gentlemen, the Suez Canal previously showed us how important open strategic autonomy was for Europe. Now the geopolitical situation is showing us this even more. We have cyber attacks that have affected us. So we need to develop European strategies. There are the BRICS states as well. We have to trade with these countries. There are hundreds of millions of people. They have raw materials in their countries. Another point that is very important for us here in Europe is SMEs. They often get forgotten when industry is discussed. Europe has real strength in this field, and I think the Erasmus project has shown how important we can work together for young people and education. We as politicians have to be able to think ahead. We need to encompass all our citizens from Portugal to Romania. We have to bring people along with us. We have to convince them when it comes to climate change, when it comes to food security, supply chains. All of this has to be encompassed if we're going to have economic security on our continent. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tasser, to be followed by Mr. De Mesmaeker from Belgium.
Pozdravljeni. Jaz se bom osredotočila na raziskave in inovacije.
I'd like to focus on research and innovation, Mr. President, because I think it's vitally important when it comes to strategic autonomy. When it comes to research, there's a brain drain going on. People are leaving Europe to find work elsewhere, but there's also a loss in the states which they're originally from. In Slovenia, for example, my country, we do offer assistance which will allow these people to come back and invest in Slovenia. We want to help them, these returners, help them overcome the red tape. If you've lived a long time abroad, it's difficult sometimes to get round all the red tape and forms you have to fill in. It's important we provide balance between work and private life. We need to provide quality health services. In the EU we have a good system, but it's not just a question of investing money, but also investing in intelligence, encouraging these people to come back to Europe. Mr. de Mesmaeker, and then Ms. Morelli.
Merci beaucoup, je parlerai néerlandais. De commissaris heeft terecht gewezen op de valkuilen.
Well, Commissioner quite rightly pleaded for strategic openness. Protectionism is negative for the European Union and damaging, and that's important for our identity. I come from a region of Flanders that depends on open trade. Of course, there are times when you have to combat dependence, for example, dependence on Russian gas. So that was right. We need diversification of our supply chains, especially in key sectors. But also we need to strike the right balance. You need openness to foreign investment that keeps our economies breathing, but at the same time we need to support our own homegrown industry, and the same applies to defense policy. We have a front due to the aggression on Ukraine, but if we need to be realistic about this being a European matter, we're all victims of this hybrid war, disinformation, impacts on raw materials, cooperation with other states such as Iran, North Korea and others in the forms of cyber attacks. These are threats that we need to get some control on, and we need to boost NATO as well.
Suivi par
Ms. Morelli and then Mr. Efthasliou from Cyprus. President, colleagues, with the Green New Deal, the EU is trying to revive huge numbers of sectors for the protection, involving the protection of the environment as well. But they threaten areas of the agri-food sectors and the incomes of lots of people working for them, and allowing foodstuffs in from countries that don't use or don't apply our standards of production. It's an ambitious strategy, but it's penalising SMEs, particularly in the manufacturing sector. And this has been confirmed by ECB reports on the impact of climate change policies on productivity. They talk about the slowdown in production because of environmental issues which make our companies less competitive in Europe. The CBAM, for example, is an environmental tax on imported products, but it doesn't have any corrective mechanism to support international competitiveness of European SMEs. And in fact, it allows foodstuffs from other countries which are the result of poor practices to come in. And it's the same thing with other aspects of the policy as well. Mr. Efsthathiou from Cyprus, and then Ms. Bengtsson Jutland from Sweden. Thank you, President. We all agree that the strategic autonomy of Europe is important, but if that's going to happen, we need to change our mindset. We need to become leaders. We should stop being a pupil of other countries and actually take a leading role. We're hearing a lot of words, but we're not seeing a lot of action. We're talking about independence from the United States and from all of those who are exploiting the rather defensive mindset that we've got in Europe. So we need to have a winner's mindset, a leader's mindset, a culture of autonomy that will allow us to play a role in the big leagues. The invasion of Cyprus by Turkey, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, all of these things should be borne in mind as well.
Ms.
Bengtson-Jutland, and then Rainer Robra from Germany.
Thank you, Mr. President, and dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to say that there are too few women in this debate. We need to be more mixed. It's very negative for all of us, for credibility, that we don't mix more in the debates. Now, that said, I also would like to point out that I find that when we speak about strategic autonomy, we need to be more strategic. We are very much into tactics here, handling war now, handling energy prices now, handling situations that farmers are out in Brussels now. We need to understand that strategic means pointing out a target for the future and reach it. And we cannot always be short-minded. I'm a mother, maybe that's why we need mothers in this debate. With the kids, you need to say to them, it is not all about now. It's about your future. Where will you be after the education? You need to do things now to get you to a safer place in the future. That's why we need a green transition here also. We cannot back off of that. So please be more strategic. Thank you.
I thank you. Monsieur Robra.
Mr. Robra?
Well, the situation is very dramatic. We're seeing the relocation of established industry on an unprecedented scale. We've seen China flogging its dumping priced goods. The automotive sector is under extreme pressure. Fertilizer production is no longer competitive due to high oil prices, and despite everything, Russia is in control of the global markets. But we have attempts to try and produce semiconductors locally. There's efforts for a competitive internal digital market, and in order to achieve those objectives we need qualified workers, and I thank Commissioner Schmidt for his activities and Commissioner Breton for his comments. So we are no longer competitive when we look to the world, and we have some catching up to do. Thank you.
Monsieur Dinku, Vassil Dinku sera suivi par
Mr. Vassili Dinku, followed by Mr. Christos Pantelidis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues. We're talking about strategic autonomy with a view to the future, because this is what strategic autonomy is, the future of Europe. When we talk about the future, we talk about several types of security, economic, social, military, health security, but generation security is very important, because this is what the future are. Young people are the future. It's important how we raise our children, how we talk to young people, what they if we want to save Europe, we need to disseminate the European projects, said a French sociologist, and this just doesn't happen by itself. We're in the middle of a hybrid war. Sometimes Russia manages to convince those who have social problems. We talked about competitiveness and resilience. Sometimes too much competitiveness hurts resilience, and young people know that. The polls are showing us that young people, a third of European young people, will cast an anti-European vote. So let's be very careful with how we disseminate our European project, and be very careful about the young people's resilience. Thank you.
Monsieur Pantelidis.
Mr. Pantelidis has the floor next, followed by Mr. Richard calls for Latvia.
Thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I agree with what Commissioner Breton was saying. And we need to make certain that we follow through on these issues. It's not just a question of Russia. Turkey should be considered as well. Let me remind you that 50 years ago, Turkey illegally occupied half of my country. The last 20 years, my country has been a member of the European Union. However, there is still this case. Nothing has happened. Weapons and strategic equipment are being sold by EU member states to Turkey. And there is also trading between the European Union with this occupying power of Turkey. Let's remember that these issues should apply to all of us, and these values should be respected by all of us.
Mr. Kols is next, followed by Mikko Polvinen from Finland.
Thank you, Chair. On strategic autonomy, I would like to raise 2 points. One is the utmost importance for the EU to invest in research and development and innovation. This is why our GDP is not where the US GDP and it's falling. And it's also the political approach when it's for the research and development. Whereas in the US it's given 5 years for the researchers to deliver the innovative products, we are pushing our researchers to deliver in 2 years. So that means we don't have the quality, we have quantity. And that is also affects our competition as well internationally. The second point is actually very important, is the trade agreements. Well, the last major trade agreement we signed in 2017, it's 7 years. We haven't delivered on any major free trade agreement. That also symbolizes where we stand in the global competition. And last but not least point, well, we talked about the foreign intervention. Well, we have member states that foreign ministers are actually stating that we're going to deepen cooperation, economic cooperation with Russia in areas where there are no EU sanctions. So what strategic autonomy are we talking here? Thank you.
Thank you. Mikko Polvinen a la parole.
Next is Mr. Mikko Polvinen, followed by Mr. Koziczny from Poland.
Aiemme käsitellä Euroopan kilpailukykyä ja resilienssiä.
Thank you very much. What we're talking about is competitiveness and resilience. The hybrid effect of Russia is becoming more and more expansive. We have huge challenges ahead of us when it comes to maintaining our logistics within Europe. These new hybrid attacks are something we need to be able to defend ourselves against. In particular, the eastern countries are affected by this. We see a real danger to our competitiveness. This also affects investment in our countries. I hope that these border regions will be able to play a special role within the EU, will have special consideration. We need to look at what countries are getting investment. We need competitive border regions in the EU. Thank you. Next, we have the Polish representative, followed by Mr. Andrusic from Montenegro.
Europe needs to stand strongly on its feet. We need solid industry. We need to be able to protect ourselves, to defend ourselves. But we also need to be talking about human rights and international law. And therefore, I welcome the support for Ukraine. But unfortunately, we don't react sufficiently at what is taking place in Gaza. Poverty, hunger caused by the Israeli state. But in our resolution, we don't talk about who is guilty of those crimes. It is bad news for the Palestinians, for human rights, and for Europe, because through double standards, Europe loses credibility as defender of human rights and international law.
Monsieur Andusik pour le...
Mr. Andusik is next for Montenegro, followed by Mr. Usuncu for Turkey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, dear colleagues and partners. EU response to crisis needs to evolve. EU needs to learn from the past to prepare for the future. If Europe wants to become globally competitive in the future, EU needs to foster and deepen its single market for goods, energy, people and ideas. Innovation must be the key for Europe's future competitiveness. Today, we must work on implementing ideas that will work nowadays also in 50 years now. As united, not as individuals. There is no I and we. Resilience is not what Europe does, it's what Europe is, if our objective is peace. The growth plan for the Western Balkans is a great chance to bring the region closer to the single European market, to show that the Western Balkans can function as the mini-EU, to strengthen relations with our neighbours and show that we deserve to be credible, legitimate and equal partner to the EU in the near future. Montenegro, as NATO member and country leader in EU enlargement process, surely stands on EU path and on what the EU is built on. The EU resilience also depends on the EU agility and willingness to listen to its neighbours.
Voilà, Monsieur Unchunku pour la Turquie.
Mr. Unchunku for Turkey has the floor, followed by Mr. Ricketts for the UK.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me first of all underline that the Cyprus issue is not a one of invasion or occupation. The existence of the Turkish forces on the island stems from international treaties. Mr. Chair, the ongoing turbulent era marked with global challenges like food security, as well as energy supply, climate change, threat of terrorism, irregular migration, and the competition with rivals like China and the USA. The strategic autonomy presented as today will highly depend on our policies in the wider Europe, and in order to maintain our regulatory power, on our ability to reorganize our ties with our neighborhood and beyond. Both the pandemic and the war between Ukraine and Russia, and now the threat posed to our trade routes in the Middle East, underline the need for the EU and Turkey to further our economic and political ties, to overcome and revitalize the accession process in order to reach a multiplier effect in achieving European global leadership and
Voilà, Monsieur Ricketts for...
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Forbes Ricketts for the UK, and followed by Mr. Rizata Krasniki for Kosovo.
Yesterday, the British government denounced China for a clear pattern of hostile cyber attacks against our democratic process, including the intrusion into our electoral register database of 40 million names and persistent attacks on parliamentary email accounts. The US condemned a similar pattern of attacks. In this year of elections, it's safe to assume that China will also be targeting other democracies, including those represented in this room. This is an example, Mr. Chairman, of why it's so important to talk about open strategic autonomy. The EU's objective of reinforcing economic security is shared by other like-minded democracies in Europe and Asia. We will be more effective in responding to an increasingly aggressive Chinese challenge if we act together. And this will be even more important if a future President Trump accelerates the trend towards protectionism and isolationism in the US. So a strong yes to open strategic autonomy.
I thank you. Et donc, pour finir, Madame...
Thank you very much. To conclude, Ms. Krasniki for Kosovo.
Dear colleagues, today the state of Kosovo is the only country in the Western Balkans that has not yet been granted the status of candidate country for EU membership. Therefore, I ask for your support as a member states because the advancement of Kosovo in the European agenda means little encouragement for Russian intervention in the Western Balkans. Regarding the open strategic autonomy, which aims to reduce external dependence in areas of strategic importance, especially security, in particular the threats that comes from possible intervention by Russia, mainly through Serbia in the Western Balkans and Kosovo. So the recognition of Kosovo and its advancement path in the European agenda prevents external intervention, especially Russian. We also respect the position of the EU and some other member states regarding Kosovo, even though 81% of them recognize Kosovo as a state, as well as the European Parliament itself. The place where we are sitting today in this meeting, European Parliament, is the only institution which has accepted Kosovo and has constantly repeated calls through resolutions for Kosovo to be accepted. Therefore, there is a proverb that says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is now. In conclusion, we look forward to having the support of the national parliaments of the member states so that measures imposed... Thank you.
Voilà, merci à tous, chers collègues.
Thank you very much. We have a really tight schedule, sorry. I would suggest that our Professor, Mr. Udon, could just say a few words to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just 4 really rapid points about that. And as an academic, there are a few elements that I would like to raise in this debate. First, in terms of social security, someone talked about the social security. It is clearly established today that the just transition or any environmental transition will require a strengthening on the social security. So we don't only talk about the social pillar, but also about social security at large, because the green transition obviously will have an impact in terms of variance. It's not only the average, but it's also the variance, the one that are affected. Second point, there are already a lot of tools in the European Union. So the point is probably today, more than creating new tools, to strengthen the existing tools and to decouple, to multiply the budget related to these different tools also. Third element, someone was talking about SMEs. There are academic evidence, there are surveys, there are papers showing that indeed the regions that have been the most resilient to crisis are the ones where you have a network of SMEs which is vibrant also. So definitely there is this necessity to focus probably more on SMEs if you want to be resilient and probably more resilient also in the type of projects that we have. There was also a mention about productivity and the fact that environmental norms would affect productivity. I would say that it's a very short-term view in the sense that there are also a lot of empirical evidence. I talk about empirical evidence also showing that because of climate change, there are some clear impacts on a lot of companies today. So that's going to be on the short term, but this impact will be demultiplied in the years also. So if we don't work now, basically if we don't try to handle this issue now, this evidence, the climate change and all the environmental crisis will have even more impacts basically on the well-being and on the competitiveness of our economy. So I think it's extremely short-term, it's really like a short-term vision to highlight just this side of the coin. The flip side of the coin is probably even important. Voilà.
Merci, Monsieur le Professeur, pour...
Thank you, Professor, for those concluding comments. I would like to thank you all for your participation in this very interesting session. I will close this session. We will just take a few minutes to get our speakers up for the next session. Please don't leave because we will start again imminently. We don't want to delay our timing any further.
Pour voir comment on prend les choses.
Oui.
Que pas une seule personne.
Chers collègues,
Dear colleagues, please take your seats so we can get started with our work for this morning. During this second session, we're going to look more closely at democracy and the rule of law in Europe. During the presidency of the EU, Belgium chose protection of democracy as one of its priorities, as well as strengthening the rule of law and promoting transparent and fair European elections. During the Belgian presidency, important steps were taken towards creating a package of measures to protect democracy before the European elections. This is an important legislative packet with regards to transparent and democratic elections, while also taking into account interference from third countries. Belgium will continue to fully support the European Commission in its role of guardian of the treaties and will call on it to strictly apply existing instruments in the area of the rule of law. I would like to highlight the importance of the Commission's report on the rule of law. We should be pleased that this annual report is discussed by a majority of national parliaments in the European Union. The national parliaments of the European Union can help to promote a European culture of rule of law which is strengthened. Our rule of law is vulnerable in certain cases. The independence of our judiciary can be subject to a lot of pressure, and in such cases the rule of law can be threatened, it can be challenged. During a recent meeting of the General Affairs Council in February 2024, Poland presented its action plan in order to re-establish rule of law. This is a plan that takes into account the concerns that were raised under the Article 7 procedure. So the idea is to tackle these concerns. Poland's reform plan is key and deserves all of our support. The principles in the EU should be protected, even more so now that we are seeing war in Europe. These values and principles are non-negotiable, they are irreversible, and the enlargement of the EU should not affect the acquis of the Union or the fundamental rights of the Union or rights of its citizens. Before hearing from our speakers today, I would first of all like to give the floor to the member of the Permanent Secretariat of the COSAC so that he can present the reports of the annual report and more specifically the chapter dedicated to democracy and rule of law in Europe. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President, Honourable Chair, Commissioner, Honourable guests, Honourable members. I will now say a few words about the third chapter of the biannual report of COSAC, which concerns precisely democracy and the rule of law in Europe. Again, I will limit myself to pointing to some core findings in the report. Firstly, it can be noted that all parliaments and chambers who were asked indicated that the annual rule of law report from the Commission is scrutinised, though in some parliaments only by one chamber. And in a majority of the cases, the report is scrutinised on committee level, though in 8 parliament chambers it is also debated in plenary, and in 4 through the adoption of a resolution. A large majority of respondents, furthermore, indicated that the entire report is scrutinised, not only parts or bits of it. I would also say that an opportunity was furthermore given to Parliament's chamber to rate how successful they consider the report has been in addressing 5 predefined specific challenges. And here a majority indicated that they thought that the independence of the judiciary and the independence of the media had been most successfully addressed. in the report. I will leave you with this little glimpse of the biannual report, which, as I mentioned at the outset yesterday, is based on a questionnaire drafted by the Presidency and is available online at the IPEX website. And I wish you a fruitful exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cheval. Chers collègues.
Dear colleagues, the fourth session on the future of democracy and the place of the rule of law will take the form of an interactive session which will be led by Mr. Rob Hilbert, who is a journalist for European Affairs at the Flemish radio and television broadcaster. And this is going to be about asking questions, specific questions to the parliamentarians here present. But before that, I'll give the floor to the Commissioner for Justice, Mr. Didier Reynders. Since 2004, Didier Reynders has been Vice Prime Minister, Minister in numerous governments. He's been in charge of reform of institutions, finances and European affairs as well as foreign affairs. And since 2019, he has been European Commissioner in charge of justice, consumers and data protection. The publication of the annual report on the rule of law is an annual occasion to welcome you, Commissioner, at the heart of the Federal Committee dealing with European matters. And this COSAC plenary session is yet another opportunity to welcome you. So welcome you and invite you to take the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you once again for the annual invitation to the Belgian Federal Parliament to discuss the Rule of Law report. Ladies and gentlemen, deputies, senators.
I will say some words first in French and then in English about the report. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de vous...
Let me start by thanking you, first of all, for this invitation to take part in this plenary session today, which has been organised in Brussels within the framework of the Belgian presidency of the EU Council. The rule of law, democracy and fundamental rights are all key values of the European Union and its member states. The rule of law has fundamental importance for the EU. It is a union of rights. It guarantees the effective application of EU law and plays a crucial role when it comes to its implementation based on mutual trust. It has a place of particular importance in our values as enshrined in Article 2 of the Treaty of the European Union. It guarantees the protection of all of the other fundamental rights. Unfortunately, the situation in certain member states is concerning, and in some cases the rule of law is contested. These developments show us that we cannot consider the rule of law to be a given. In order to deal with these challenges, the European Union has broadened the range of instruments that it has available to it in the matter of the rule of law.
First time, our annual rule of law report. The report is a preventive tool at the center of an annual cycle aimed to protect the rule of law by identifying areas where progress could be made and to prevent challenges from emerging or deepening. In this instrument, the Commission analyses the situation in all the Member States on an equal footing and according to the same methodology. The report covers 4 areas: the independence, quality and efficiency of national justice systems, the institutional framework in the fight against corruption, media pluralism and media freedom, as well as institutional questions linked to checks and balances. Since 2022, the report has also been accompanied by recommendations addressed to each member state. Thus, the role of this report does not stop at its publication. The aim is to ensure continuous monitoring of the situation in each member state and to examine concrete solutions to address the shortcomings identified. The fourth annual report was adopted in July last year. For the first time, it assessed how the previous year's recommendations were implemented. The report has become a real driver of reforms. Considerable efforts are being made in many member states to address the recommendations addressed to them. We have seen that it was possible to have 2/3 of the recommendation totally or partially implemented in the member states. So it's not only a way to disseminate a culture of the rule of law in all the member states, in the entire European Union, it's also a way to improve the situation concretely in many member states. Nous sommes actuellement...
We are currently preparing the 5th edition of the report that will be adopted in July. As we do each year, we have had a targeted public consultation and we spoke to national governments as well as other stakeholders. We conducted virtual visits of all the member states, and it concludes today with France. In the context of these visits, we had meetings with a number of national authorities, legal bodies, and other independent institutions, as well as civil society organizations, but also with certain national parliaments.
By Commission President Ursula von der Leyen in her State of the Union address last September, we will this year extend the rule of law report to 4 candidate countries. Albania, North Macedonia, Montenegro and Serbia will participate in this exercise. These are the countries that are most advanced in their respective accession process or that have made the most progress on the rule of law. This will put them on an equal footing with member states and support them in their reform efforts. And this reinforces the principle that respect for the rule of law and for other fundamental values is an essential condition for accession to the Union. Il est important.
It is important that once this report is adopted, it forms the basis of a true political dialogue on the rule of law with different actors. Within the General Affairs Council, ministers have regular discussions on the situation of the rule of law and have specific discussions related to a number of member states. 12 member states are covered each year. During the last discussion that was held on this subject in January, ministers had exchanges on the situation in Spain, France, Croatia and in Italy. The debates with the European Parliament are also extremely important, as well as with national parliaments, and I try to travel to those national parliaments at their invitation as often as possible. Since the adoption of the last report, I've had the opportunity to present this report to several of these national parliaments and to talk about the situation of the rule of law more generally in Europe, with representatives of the citizens in the member states. As you recalled, Madam Chair, I had discussions with the Belgian Federal Parliament in December of last year, with the National Assembly of Bulgaria during a visit in February. Sometimes I also meet delegations when they travel to Brussels, and that was the case just a few weeks ago with some senators from the Netherlands. National parliaments play a key role when it comes to promoting and protecting the rule of law. Democratic dialogue and legislative processes are key to a balance of powers. The legislative process is one of the key aspects that we focus on in the Rule of Law report. We are, of course, aware that dialogue is not a means to an end. It is something that has to lead to results. As I have often said, we see improvements in rule of law in the majority of member states and candidate countries that we also analyse. I don't want to go into too much depth when it comes to the other instruments at the Commission's disposal. As you know, we have the President of the Court of Justice who is here with us. We often have infringement procedures that are brought before the European Court of Justice. For example, the procedure under Article 7, that can be done before Council. We also have budget conditionality and the recovery plans post-COVID, which have also been used to apply pressure through budgetary tools when it comes to possible violations of rule of law, or perhaps as a way to accelerate reforms. I would like to conclude by insisting on the fact that promoting the rule of law is a responsibility for all of us. The institutions of the EU, the member states, national authorities and national parliaments all have their role to play in this situation. We will take on board all of the messages that we hear in this debate from national parliaments, also from other stakeholders, and there are a number of tools at the disposal of the Council of Europe, the Venice Commission, Greco, for example, or when it comes to the case law of the European Court of Justice, which converges more and more with the court in Strasbourg. It can go in both directions. I will not speak any further on this subject at this point, but I appreciate this exchange that we have on an annual basis, and I hope that thanks to your support and cooperation, this will become a real tool to help disseminate the culture of rule of law in the EU, in candidate countries and in partner countries. Thank you very much.
Merci, Monsieur Renders.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Renders. I now give the floor to Rob Ebbott, who will in turn give the floor to three eminent legal experts who will be taking this panel discussion and will be taking your questions. Mr. Elba.
And good morning, everybody. Let me present first the three panelists here in front of the plenary room. On my left side, Koen Leenaerts, who is President of the European Court of Justice for almost 10 years now. Next to him, Françoise Tulkens, former judge in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, not to be confused with the European Court of Justice, as happens very often. And last but not least, Arnaud van Weyenberg, who is Associate Professor of Law at HEC Paris, Haute Études Commerciales Paris, and also visiting professor at the College of Europe. First, I will explain a bit how we will proceed during this debate. First, we will give the opportunity to each speaker to give a short presentation to explain their point of view or to ask a question to the room. Then I will give the floor to anybody who raises his hand. Not everybody. We are limited in time, so I will have to make a choice between who will get the floor. So I suggest that if you want to take the floor, raise your hand, make sure that I will see it. I will group a few questions from you, reactions from you, and then let the expert react. So we'll do that 3 times to make sure that everybody gets the opportunity to take part in the debate. I will ask you to be short, punctual, and not make long statements, so that as many people as possible can take the floor. Okay, let's kick off with the first speaker, Koen Leenaerts. Please, Mr. Leenaerts, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Commissioner, dear colleagues, Mr. Tulkens, Eva Weinberg.
Of the European Parliament, distinguished members of national parliaments. 2 years ago, in the seminal conditionality judgments, the Court of Justice of the European Union, sitting in full court, was confronted with a defining question for the future of European integration. The question was rather straightforward, and could be recast as follows. What is the legal value of the values on which the European Union is founded? Stated differently, is the protection of the values of respect for democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental rights a political question, meaning that it is only for the political process to protect held that those values are an integral part of the very identity of the European Union as a common legal order. Values which are given concrete expression in principles containing legally binding obligations for member states.
Okay. There was a problem with the microphone, but apparently it's solved now. Thank you. Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you, Mark. In that passage, the Court of Justice is sending a very powerful message that strikes at the very heart of European integration. From a constitutional perspective, the Court is telling us what the European Union is all about. It is more than its internal market. It is first and foremost a union of values. First, the Court finds that the values on which the EU is founded are not limited to the realm of moral philosophy or political science, but they are part and parcel of the body of law that underpins the EU project as a whole. Democracy, the rule of law and fundamental rights are part of the DNA of the European Union. Notably, when general principles give concrete expression to those values, the values may impose legally binding obligations on the member states. Legally binding obligations meaning that the Court of Justice is enforcing the respect of those binding obligations. Second, the Court of Justice explains that there is an unbreakable link between values and the identity of the European Union. What brings EU citizens together is their shared commitment to respecting democracy, the rule of law, and fundamental rights. And fundamental rights include equality, protection of minorities, and solidarity, the social rights. We Europeans, we are diverse in that we may speak different languages, pray to different gods, or to no God at all, or have a different understanding of family life. And yet, we are united because we share and cherish those founding values which I just mentioned. That shared and ongoing commitment is what being European is all about, and by extension, what defines membership in the European Union. In a moment in history where authoritarian tendencies are on the rise, both within and outside the European Union, the EU must operate as a beacon of freedom, democracy and justice for the wider world by defending its own identity. Third and last, the European Union is a common legal order, a common legal space. This means, in essence, that EU values are not the result of a top-down imposition of values, but follow a bottom-up dynamic that draws on the constitutional traditions common to the member states. Those values crystallize the struggle of previous generations of Europeans who strived for freedom, democracy and justice. They form part of our common heritage as Europeans. Moreover, EU values allow room for national diversity, since those values do not impose a specific constitutional model, but limit themselves to providing a framework of reference within which policy choices may be made by each member state in keeping with its history, its culture and its tradition. In the conditionality judgments and subsequent case law, the Court of Justice is reminding us that European integration must revolve around common values that put human dignity centre stage. As the guardian of the rule of law within the EU, the Court of Justice will continue to uphold those values. However, there is only so much the Court can do. The Court cannot and should not be left alone in defending the values on which the Union is founded. As Alexander Hamilton wrote 230 years ago in the Federalist Papers, the judicial department is the least dangerous branch. Courts in democratic societies, and fortunately enough I would add, lack the power of the purse or the power of the sword. It is the legitimacy flowing from the trust that citizens place in the judicial process that gives strength to judicial decisions. Moreover, courts are not proactive. They don't design policy for the future. That's you doing it. That's parliamentarians. Courts are reactive, since they react to solve the cases that are brought before them. It is therefore the political process, that is you, at both national and European level, to protect the values on which the Union is based in an active fashion. Politicians have a special responsibility in reminding citizens across Europe why a democratic government, an independent judiciary and a free press cannot be taken for granted and must be defended and protected against both domestic and foreign threats. Politicians have a special responsibility in protecting free and fair elections based on pluralism, tolerance, diversity of debate, be it at national or European level, by assuring the integrity of the democratic process as a whole. Politicians have a special responsibility in respecting the rulings of courts, even if they disagree with them, and must refrain from undermining publicly the authority of courts, in particular when courts rule against the political majority of the moment, which may be the case to protect the fundamental human rights of the minority. That is what the same Alexander Hamilton has called the protection of discrete minorities on the basis of their human rights against the tyranny of the majority. Dear members of COSAC, we must all work together in convincing citizens that the best way forward is to defend a united Europe based is how do we prepare the next generations through educational policy in our various member states in order to keep a stable and peaceful Europe for the generations ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lenaers, for clarifying these important judgments from the Court of Justice and for your question to the politicians in the room, how to prepare future generations. I saw a lot of hands raised, people who want to react or give their own expression, but I will start in the front row. Number 32, did you want to speak, or 35? Yes.
Yeah, thank you for the intervention. In relation to the free press and the media freedom and how to protect, there are two examples in European Union soil that maybe we should keep in mind. That is Pablo González, a Spanish journalist in pretrial detention in incommunicado situation during 2 years in Poland with no charges. And I think this is a very scandal situation. Another is Jesus Rodríguez, an online investigative media in Catalonia, and charge of terrorism for peaceful demonstrations supporting the Catalan political prisoners some years ago. But the real motive behind this retaliation is the uncovering espionage operation of Spanish police forces and their infiltration in social movements. So we know that media freedom is the cornerstone of democracy, human rights, and all of this. So how can we, as a minority, for instance, how can we, as a politicians, support this and change the laws, because we are in a minority situation? Thank you.
Okay. Next speaker, let's see, over here, number 149.
Hello, thank you for giving me the floor. In September 2023, Ursula von der Leyen proposed in her State of the European Union speech that in the future the EU candidate states should also be included in the dialogue on the rule of law. And Estonia supports this proposal because it creates a possibility for the candidate countries to gain input, knowledge and experience from our discussions, which are necessary for the progress of the accession negotiations. And as said by Mr. Lenaers, the European Union is based on values. Therefore, we see that European Union member states must be corruption-free and transparent, have a strong justice system, freedom of the press, and separation of powers. And if we talk about the way ahead, then Estonia considers important the following: reducing administrative burden, strategic investments in defense from all member states, the digital and green turn with fair transition, the enlargement of the European Union, and lastly, the strategic defeat of Russia and the victory of Ukraine on Ukraine's terms. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Here in the front row again, 32.
Thank you. Realmente estoy de acuerdo en que garantizar una eficaz defensa.
I agree that having an effective defence of the rule of law in each member state needs to be a priority for the EU without exceptions and without any differentiation. The rule of law is under threat in the EU if governments put party, political or personal interests ahead of the general interests of all citizens. When the criminal code isn't applied fairly and certain people are given preferential treatment under the law for party political reasons. We suffer in the EU if certain member states have a different way of applying the law for the benefit of certain groups. This undermines citizens' trust in their governments. It gives rise to disaffection with the institutions. It undermines the respect for fundamental rights and is an extremely negative precedent, and it gives rise to undesirable scenarios. That's why it's absolutely vital that the EU count with instruments which would allow it to act unequivocally when certain member states, that what happens in Spain happens in other EU member states. When we've had this adoption of the amnesty law and the socialist government is pushing it through, in exchange for the votes it needs to stay in power. It's clearly undermining the principle of equality of Spaniards before the law. We need to count with instruments which will allow an unambiguous intervention of the EU to stop this kind of behaviour, to pretend our democratic values and...
More than 1 minute, I think. Mr. Leonards, I saw you writing a lot. There were 2 Spanish questions, a bit different ones, on minorities and on amnesty.
This works, I
Yes.
think, from here. Well, first of all, I would like to react to the first intervention on the freedom of the press. I think what has been said there is the essence of what freedom of the press is all about. That is that that measures are taken in order to counteract to retaliation measures. It's typical that the minorities are being pushed aside, and that governments often try through very sophisticated ways. It would lead me too far to be more explicit, but I mean sometimes through public procurement procedures, etc., to favor certain business groups, which then can control the media in turn, and all of this over lines which are not fully compatible with the European Union public procurement rules. And this is sort of an influence taking over the media, which then of course will speak the language advocated by the government. And that is sort of a subreptitious process which step by step, little by little takes over the main press organs, both public and even private, through these mergers and acquisitions procedures, so that the minority view in the press can no longer be protected. That is where politicians have a responsibility in their parliaments with democratic majorities to vote to protect the pluralism of the press. It's the only thing which I can say, and to see to very specific rules on the public procurement. I give the example of the Greek constitution. My academic field is comparative constitutional law, and in the Greek constitution there is indeed a prohibition to hand out public contracts to companies which are related to press interests. So if you take an interest in a company which is owning a press organ, you can no longer get, if that is a conglomerate company, you can no longer get a contract to build a bridge or to build a road, for instance, because that is seen as a confusion, a conflict of interest. So that's maybe an interesting idea to think of. Second, I couldn't agree more with the person, I think, from Estonia, who spoke about the rule of law requirements for the acceding member states. It is extremely important that the acceding member state satisfies the requirements of the values of Article 2. And actually, when you read Article 49 of the Treaty on the European Union, it says expressly that a European state that respects the values of Article 2 can request accession. So when you read the text of Article 49, literally, it implies that you should already satisfy these requirements when you request accession. De facto, it is throughout the process of accession negotiations that the compliance with these values will be consolidated. And as the speaker rightly said, separation of powers, but also an effective fight against corruption and fraud. There can be no rule of law when there is no effective combating fraud, especially fraud committed with EU funds, because there it would be EU funds which are used for objectives different from those for which they have been granted. That, of course, takes away any legitimacy to the solidarity within the Union, which is promoted by these funds. Now, these funds are fantastic. Solidarity is a core value of the European Union, but solidarity implies the responsibility to use the funds in a way which is compliant with the objectives for which the funds have been granted. So it's absolutely crucial in terms of rule of law compliance for candidate member states that there is a guarantee of effective sanctioning of fraud and corruption, thereby protecting the human rights.
Thank you, Mr.
I think that is sufficient as an answer so far, because the Spanish question I cannot reply.
Maybe Mr. Reinders
might be pending for
Justice
the
Commissioner. Maybe Mr. Reinders can give an answer.
Very briefly, just to say about media freedom, that we are working now with new tools. We have already the tools of competition policy, of course, it was said. We have asked more transparency in the ownership of the media, but also now there is the Media Freedom Act, and we'll continue to work on it. Also on the protection of the journalists, but I don't want to elaborate on this. Just to give an example about the so-called SLAPs, we have now a proposal to try to help and support the journalists. About the candidate countries, I said myself, we have had 4 candidate countries in the rule of law report for this year. So in July we'll publish the report also on 4 candidate countries. About the situation between Ukraine and Russia, I don't want to explain what we are doing with the military support, the financial support, and with the way to receive the refugees. But we try so to implement the rule of law and to bring perpetrators of war crimes to justice, also perpetrator of the crime of aggression. And the same in the fact that we try to be sure that Russia will pay for the damage caused by the Russian aggression. Last word on very specific issues, of course, concerning the legislation in Spain, because I have received many remarks about the amnesty law. We are waiting for a final text. We have assessed from the beginning the process, and we need to wait the final text before to say more. But you know that we have other discussions now in Spain about the General Council for the Judiciary, and I try to solve the issue. And last word on the fraud against the European budget. I want to recall that we have now, since more than 2 years, the European Public Prosecutor Office. So with the Chief Prosecutor Lavacovesi in Luxembourg, it's possible to start investigations and prosecutions from the European level directly in the different member states, and it's quite useful. And we have more and more participants. Poland decided to join, Sweden has decided to join, and we are in discussion with Ireland. So we are making progress on this.
Thank you, Mr. Reinders. Okay, are there more people in the room with a question? Okay. Mr. I don't know your name, but you have a yellow shirt. Okay.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Spotted. Well, democracy and the rule of law are non-negotiables of the EU's unity and credibility. In this regard, I really wanted to hear the legal assessment when it comes to European Court of Justice. Can solidarity be mandatory? Can that be? Because we see the EU laws as well, they evolve. And when it comes to values, it's not just something abstract. We see it's already being enshrined in the legislation and so on. So coming back, can something like solidarity can be mandatory? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll take another one, Mr. Sorry to call you a number, 241.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a brief question. President Leonard talks about free and fair election, and we are used to think about external election, but what about the European election? Are we sure that the integrity process of the election is not menaced by external interference through the use of artificial intelligence, for example, in order to influence our internal election? What about our tool to defend the integrity process in order to assure free and fair election at the European level? Thank you.
Okay, here in the front row, number 40 from Hungary.
Zagro. Thank you very much, and thank you for having the possibility to ask. Since 2010, in elections, the Fidesz got 2/3 of the votes, so this is the civilian right. And we're talking about Europe, where it is exceptional if a government can get to the end of their mandate. Recently, the European Commission and Hungary had concluded agreements in 20 rule of law issues, and according to the assessment, Hungary satisfied these requirements, and this was acknowledged by the Council and by the Commission. Therefore, the frozen resources were freed up. Afterwards, the European Parliament blackmailed the European Commission, and now we start all over again. How far can we go? How far can we use the methods of the stick and blackmail? For us, this can only go on to the next European elections. But what do you think about it? How long can we use double measures?
Thank you very much. And there's another question here before I return to the panel.
I don't really have a question. I wanted to respect the format organized here and answer to the question of the President of the Court. You asked, how do we prepare the next generation? This is a question which was very much raised also during the Conference on the Future of Europe, where I recall that 1/3 of the participants were young people between 16 and 25. And they called in the proposals that we need in education more programs about civic and politics in the schools. Unfortunately, the European Union does not have much competence in that. Therefore, it's important that in national parliaments you debate this and you answer these young people, and they want to have this political education. This is of utmost importance. And maybe, since the presidency wants us to have a ping-pong game with questions, I could ask a question to the President, Mr. Leenaerts, who is also a good friend. You said the court should not be left alone. Do you think, is the European Parliament defending you enough, and is the Commission also defending you enough? That would be my question to you. And sorry for not having read a prepared speech here. Thank you.
That's the purpose of an interactive debate, not to prepare speeches, but to be as, let's say, as original as possible. Mr. Leenaerts, there were different angles. Maybe Mr. Reinders would also want to react on the Hungarian question. But first, Mr. Leenaerts.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it works. First of all, the excellent question on the solidarity. I'm very pleased with the question because from my perspective, the answer is yes. In other words, solidarity is a mandatory requirement in all the actions of the European Union. Why? It's mentioned in Article 2. It's often forgotten. We speak about democracy, rule of law and human rights, which is very important, but the provision continues and it says in a society characterized by pluralism, tolerance, equality and solidarity. So it figures there. And in fact, solidarity already figured in the Schuman Declaration of 1950, with which it all started. So it is the idea that we are all together in the same common governance structure, and we will, like it is said in the United States Supreme Court's case law, we will swim or sink together. That's solidarity at base. And there is a further expression of solidarity in Article 9 of the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, stating that the value of solidarity understood as social inclusion. You can't exclude any group from sort of the operation of society, must be horizontally promoted in all the actions of the European Union. And that provision allows the Court of Justice in its case law to balance social objectives with economic objectives. And I wrote as an academic a study in the French language in Cahiers de droit européen on the principle of solidarity as a steering lighthouse principle for all the actions, all the policy actions of the European Union. So that is a very important development, which is part of a citizens' Europe in a way. Second, the free and fair elections to the European Parliament, I think there we heard that there is now legislation underway to strengthen democracy at EU level. I hope that will also be a response there, but I think others in the room are better placed than me to react to that. Now, the Hungarian question on rule of law, I think it's more appropriate for the Commissioner to reply to that, because it's more a matter of the Commission's responsibility as guardian of the treaties, and the Court might be seized of some questions, so that's not for me to answer them on that ground alone. Now, the question of Marek Engel, I think the European Parliament and the Commission have in fact been sort of wakened up after our case law. If you see this, without going into too many details, the very first Grand Chamber judgment under my personal presidency dates back to February 2018 of the court. It is a Grand Chamber judgment known under the name the Portuguese Judges' Judgment. It's a judgment in which we said that national courts are functionally speaking union courts, because all rules of union law are interpreted, applied and enforced in the national courts. So we said the national courts must satisfy the requirements of the rule of law, meaning independence, impartiality, and operate in accordance with fair trial rules, fundamental rights. So once we had said that, the European Commission started launching infringement actions against a number of member states for non-compliance with first the rule of law, but now also some actions for non-compliance with democracy, non-compliance with equal treatment. So all values of Article 2. So that is the infringement proceedings. I can't, of course, comment because those cases are now pending, and that would, of course, transgress the limits of my judicial office. But the Commission is doing that. Now, the Parliament is also taking initiatives to make compliance with the rule of law move forward. You know that the Parliament voted a resolution to start the Article 7 procedure, and I'm not commenting this, I'm only sort of observing it, that it took place. And according to the press, the Parliament is also planning to bring some actions before the Court of Justice directly related to the rule of law. It is that side of political oversight which is necessary, because, as I said, a court of law, that is the Court of Justice, is never taking the initiative itself. It's always other actors, such as the Commission or the Parliament, bringing cases to the Court of Justice, and then the court saying the law, reactively reacting to the case submitted to it. So yes, the Commission and the Parliament play their role.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Leenaert. And on Hungary, Didier Reinders, the most difficult topic is for you.
Just briefly, first about the elections, because we have many elections this year, not only European elections, national elections, but also we have had elections, if I may call elections the process in Russia. We will have other kind in India and so much others. And what we try to do at the European level is to protect the European elections. And just to say that to protect the European elections, we have now a defense of democracy package in discussion to protect the digital process, the cyber security, but also to fight against disinformation. And you're right, it's an important topic now to be sure that it's possible to detect and to fight against disinformation, because during the electoral process we need to react very fast, or it's too late, just before the elections. Then on Hungary, of course we are for some difficulties before the court, and there we'll see, or we have seen already, the decision of the court. What we ask is to implement the binding decision of the Court of Justice, because it's the final word. For the financial discussions, there are till now 20 billions of euros that they are frozen or not paid to Hungary. But you have seen, when there is a real reform to go in the good direction, it was possible to take a positive decision. The Commission decided to stop the suspension of some kind of cohesion programs, on the proposal of my colleague in charge of this, Nicola Schmidt, but it was possible due to some reforms passed in Hungary. So it's a dialogue, and I'm very pleased to continue the dialogue with all the member states, Hungary or others. It's on an equal footing that we are working.
Thank you very much. I will now give the floor to our second expert, Françoise Tullekens, former judge in the European Court of Human Rights and even vice president in the European Court of Human Rights.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, Madam President, for organising this vital debate. I've got 3 points. One, things we can't get round. These two, the situation of danger, and 3 possible responses. Things we can't get round. We've mentioned these before. Rule of law, democracy, human rights. What are we talking about here? The rule of law is a concept that's a guiding star when it comes to human rights. We need to rethink the meaning of the rule of law in a democratic society. It's a legal concept, a philosophical concept, a political concept on the one hand, which shows that law has priority over politics. These issues are enshrined very clearly in the European Human Rights Convention as well as the law of the European Union. It's the right to rights and the right to judges. It's the right, first of all, to have the state's power trammelled and limited and make certain that the rights and freedoms are respected by all state and bodies and public authorities. Right to judges means the total possibility of having recourse to a court which will be the guardian of the promises that have been made. So it covers legality, legal security, stopping arbitrary actions, jurisdictional protection and equality before the law. It's a vital guarantee in democracy. So I was very pleased to see this report from Mr. Reinders covering 2020 to 2023 from your European Commission, which focuses on a European culture of the rule of law, and that's the area where we need to make progress. Now, democracy, rights and freedoms, according to the preamble for the European Human Rights Convention, rights and freedoms are vitally important for justice and peace in the world, and keeping them alive means we need to have a political regime which is genuinely democratic. Democratic society is the area where human rights meet, and it gathers together the European space for human rights. Democracy is a moral and political ideal, and it's a central value underpinning European public order. But democracy isn't just a majority thing. Democracy is the protection of minorities as well, and we need to say this and repeat this as long as it's necessary. Democracy is under threat today. It's being tested, and there might be a silent erosion going on. Democracies can die. Some people ask how this can happen. These people say that there's a kind of democratic decline, democratic backsliding. It's not always immediately visible, and it can sometimes be missed during the first period, because often it happens invisibly, sometimes at the hands of those who've actually been democratically elected to power. Human rights, as I said, the 3 vital things are democracy, human rights and the rule of law. They're all guaranteed explicitly in the ECHR, in the Charter of Egypt, the UN Charter in 1945. Our charter is wonderful when it comes to human rights, but they're under threat today. They're being insulted right and left. And we have a crucial issue when it comes to human rights. Human rights are areas of conflict, particularly when it comes to children, and also rights under the issue of climate change. The man with the yellow T-shirt talked about solidarity. Solidarity rights are developing more and more today, so we need to be fully aware of them. Right, liberty, equality and solidarity rights. Those are the 3 things we can't get round. Now, what's the threat? Instruments are fragile, said Paul Ricoeur, a philosopher. Our institutions are fragile. They're fragile because nothing is permanent, as you hinted previously, Mr. Commissioner. We need to be vigilant. We need to make certain that they're resilient. fundamental values are going through a turbulent period, and they are, let's put it frankly, under attack. So I'll look at three issues since I was asked to be as brief as possible. Justice, first of all. The non-implementation of legal and national and European legal decisions, that's something that's happening more and more, and people are getting used to it. When I see people refusing to implement European Human Rights Court decisions, that's almost running counter to the rule of law. It's happened here in Belgium, it's happened in France. Non-implementation of legal decisions, if you don't agree with them, doesn't matter. This is a crucial thing, and it shouldn't happen. In the legal sphere, the need of access to courts, we need to make certain that within the European Union we have this legal cooperation based on mutual trust. How can we guarantee mutual trust if courts aren't independent? So there's a clear link there. So that's the first element of danger as far as I'm concerned. Freedom of expression. Somebody mentioned that. Freedom of expression, to quote you, is the cornerstone of democracy. It is, I think, the most significant human rights, the most fundamental human rights, because it makes us respect democracy. Allowing people to speak in a divided society, that's freedom of expression, respecting all points of view. And that is a real danger today, that's not happening. The threats, reprisals on the safety of journalists and media professionals. We've talked about the havoc wrought by disinformation. There's also, of course, the question of censorship. A third issue that's important, among many others, of course, as far as I'm concerned, is governance and integrity. Governance and integrity, the behaviour of parliamentarians and publicly elected officials. Corruption, the so-called victimless crime. Lobbying. In Belgium, there's a federal behaviour commission for members of parliament, and it's taking initiatives on these matters because they're giving rise to a very worrying situation. Those are the three dangers: justice, freedom of expression, governance and integrity. I could have mentioned several others, of course. Now, responses to them. We shouldn't be like Minerva's bird, which didn't understand that the nightfall didn't mean the end of anything. We need to do something before night falls. We need to act. We need to guarantee the credibility of our institutions and the trust of our citizens in them. The issue of trust is something that's absolutely cross-cutting here. You, parliamentarians, politicians, men and women, you have a responsibility to overcome the raison d'etat, to stop excess of power being exercised, make certain that economic, social, cultural rights are respected, and extend the concept of the rule of law to social rights as well. Commissioner Reinders talked about corruption. The Greco body in Strasbourg is playing a vital role to fight against corruption, making certain there's transparency, increase equality between men and women. They can't say this enough. We shouldn't forget rule of law, democracy and human rights. That's a vitally important point. Respecting these decisions, legal decisions, even if you disagree with them, obviously. Political responses, legal responses. When institutions can't get the rule of law respected, I'm thinking about Article 7, of course, judges need to step up. And the Court of Justice has done so, as has the European Human Rights Court. European arrest warrant, for example, wouldn't be applied if the country concerned can't prove the independence of its courts. Democracy, tolerance, media pluralism, active citizenship, resisting the awful things we see happening every day, having counterbalances to power, and possibly have a European body which is responsible for moral issues. And intellectual responses happen as well. what we need to do is rebuild, present democracy, make it something which fits the context for today. It's a vital change we need to bring in so that citizens would trust democracy more. At the moment, people tend to be trust authoritarian regimes more than they trust democratic ones. I could say a lot more, but I just wanted to end with what you said, Mr. Commissioner Reinders. Joint responsibility, collective responsibility. We've got that in these areas. Everyone has to do their part, as somebody said from the room. Thank you.
Tulkens for highlighting the many dangers that are here in the debate on the rule of law. There are many questions. I would like to ask, please stick to the topic, and if you have a concrete question or answer to what Madame Tulkens has said, it would be very much appreciated. Number 446.
Thank you. It looked to me like our real path, but I made it somehow, so maybe there's still some hope for the Western Balkan countries. Allow me to greet you all and to thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important session. As you all know, Bosnia and Herzegovina got the green light, so to speak, to start the accession negotiation process on 21st March. Historical day for BiH and for the EU as well. We thank all who contributed to that important decision. It may look different, but for us, it is the right time to ask, how shall we proceed? It is not to be forgotten that BiH is still 30 years after the civil war in the third decade of the 21st century, under the protectorate of a foreign agent, an office that is not in line with any of the positive and modern 21st century democratic practice, the so-called Office of the High Representative. The office, which is an open annihilation of democratically elected representatives, neglecting, therefore, the very well of citizens of BiH. Does this comply with a pillar of EU values or with the rule of law? And in the same line of thought, we may and should speak of foreign judges elected by the President of the European Court for Human Rights in our constitutional court, who, in the absence of the domestic judges, actually make decisions by themselves only, decisions on behalf and for citizens of BiH, their past, present and their future. Is this a normal situation for a state opening the negotiations with the EU? We made a significant progress in the last year, and we are grateful that it was recognized. The decision to open accession talks with Bosnia and Herzegovina is a big news, and it gives us an optimism that we surely need. But we must not forget that the future of Bosnia and Herzegovina must belong to its citizens and peoples and their democratically elected representatives. So we need your help once more, sorry, just one sentence, to help us this time to become real sovereign without any kind of foreign protectorate or foreign judges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Person next to you in the same row, yes.
Thank you so much. My name is Daniel. I represent the Left Party of Sweden. I have two questions. One is regarding to the candidate state of Turkey, the dictatorship of Turkey. We know that thousands and thousands of political prisoners are now held hostage in Turkish prisons. I wonder how is that connected with the rule of law and that the dictator of Erdogan decides what the judges in Turkey will decide in courts? How does that, how do you say, get along with the rule of law in Europe? That's the first question. The second question is, when we see that the International Court are deciding that Israel is creating a massacre in Gaza, in Rafah, and in other places in Palestine, how come the European politicians still don't respect the rule of law and that they don't respect and say no and stop the massacre that is happening against the Palestinian women and children every day, every night. If there were any other country doing the same thing, we would talk about the rule of law, that we should stick to the rule of law and that we should stop the murderous regime in Israel. But today we just stand against some of the dictatorship, but not all of them. And Turkey and Israel are two of the examples of that. Thank you.
And then one last here, number 189.
Thanks very much. Speaking on the rule of law, in Greece as well, the separation of powers is enshrined in our constitution. The legal system is completely independent and works through 20 independent authorities. There have been significant reforms which are facilitating the situation so that justice can act more efficiently and speedily. At the same time, we've got the question of access of citizens to justice, and that, if we increase that, we will of course increase citizens' confidence in the legal system, and that will help us develop not just better in Greece, but in the whole of the European Union if that happens elsewhere. With these changes to the Greek legal code, we are strengthening people's possibility to express their opinions, i.e. the media, journalists, and we are having more stringent penalties for hate speech, for the abuse of minors, racist and homophobic activities. Finally, the rule of law and the fundamental rights of citizens are things which are something which, of course, are non-negotiable as far as the European Union is concerned. So, and I don't think any member states which is, or any state, I beg your pardon, which is a candidate to join the European Union would be able to deviate from that. There are always other ways of cooperating with such states without letting them join the EU. Thank you.
And now number 386, Mr. Kazanchuk.
Thank you, Chair. Just like Mr. Reinders was saying, this year we have elections in many parts of Europe. In the last 20 years, justice has been a crucial element in many election campaigns. But unfortunately, many a time it was just a political tool, not based on a real need. And in the next legislature, we need to create more confidence within citizens in Parliament, those who give laws, and to answer about to the previous speaker, we need to ensure that justice is not just a privilege for magistrates or judges, and justice available to everyone. What can we do? 20 years ago, there was a memorandum signed between the Ministry of Justice and the public prosecutor, where members of the justice went in schools to teach justice, and now we changed the law, and teaching justice is one of the compulsory courses in.
Now to the panel, there have been several countries and problems being raised. Madame Tulkens, I don't know if you want to give a short reply.
Oui, volontiers. Merci beaucoup. Je vais commencer par la fin. Je prends deux questions en même temps parce que. Excusez-moi. Oui, bien.
Excuse me. I'd like to try my best to respond. Let me begin with the last two questions because they are related. I think it's very important to have a right to appeal in an independent and impartial court. All international and European conventions, all the national laws have these same requirements. But what's the point of having the right to legal redress if you don't get access? For decades now, the Human Rights Court has been saying that access to justice is part of right. And so you have to have access right from the start to the finish. So if you're right to a hearing, then you need to be able to implement and carry out justice. So it's all linked. Yes, you're absolutely right to stress the importance of access to justice, access to justice for all. And so when it comes to legal aid, obviously that question links into that. And it shouldn't be something that's a privilege. Judges should be serving citizens, everyone, men, women, children, offenders, criminals, but for all citizens, whether they are in good health or ill health. That's what access to justice means. And so you have to look at the various different systems that exist and what the obstacles are. We need to be clear, quite often there are financial obstacles, but there may well be other obstacles too. Now, when it comes to the right to free and fair elections, yes, that's an evident right. When that is not the case, suddenly we do see such examples, then action needs to be taken. So you need to make sure that you do everything within your powers, get press involved and get the media involved. All of this is very basic and essential. We have the tools in order to bring this about. It's not a lack of rights. Well, you can never have too many rights, but the problem is that you have the instruments but you're not using them, or you have the rules but you don't implement them. Now, the Israel-Palestine question. Well, we are seeing crimes against humanity. We're looking at this area, and obviously that raises human rights questions as well. That's a certainty. Now, obviously, there are many complex debates to be had. You can't just kind of make a throwaway comment in a panel like this, but in fact there are human rights texts that apply. The head of the International Criminal Court went to see the situation on the ground. So one may ask, why isn't more being done? The Abostic question, well, I am afraid I'm not an expert on that. I'm sure others would be better placed than me, but I did listen to what you were saying. Progress has been made. Perhaps Mr. Renders could come in. Yes, he's there. Indeed, absolutely. That's wonderful.
No, just to say that about Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, we have proposed from the Commission to the Council to make progress and so to start the talks on the negotiation after some reforms. So it's the same discussion about the reforms. Concerning Turkey, I want just to say that the process is frozen, you know that, and you need maybe to read the report on enlargement that we published at the end of last year. And of course, there we have described the situation, but the talks are not so much important for the moment with Turkey, except maybe in the Council of Europe. You know that about some people in jail. There are discussions in the Council of Europe and with the participation of all the member states for the possible evolution in the situation in Turkey. And the European Court of Human Rights have decided in different cases very concretely on the situation of people in jail in Turkey. I want just to say about Israel that, of course, it's a complex issue. You have raised one aspect. Of course, we have reacted after the terrorist attack of the Hamas on the 7th of October. It was very clear it was a terrorist attack. It was a right to defend the territory and the population of Israel. But now, and it was said by Mrs. Tulkens, now it's a real problem so about the protection of the civilians in Gaza, the humanitarian support, and I have had discussions with the prosecutor of the International Criminal accord, it will go there. So it will be a problem about the situation to analyze on the ground. But first of all, for the moment, what we try to do at EU level is to support a ceasefire process. That's the most important element now, with the release of the hostages and a possibility to give more support to the civilians. Although, to conclude on Greece, of course, you will have the opportunity to read our new report in July, and we'll assess all the reforms that is possible to pass for the moment in Greece in the next report.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Reinders. I see that we are a bit running behind time, and our schedule is very tight, so I will propose the next speaker to take the floor, Arnaud van Weyenberghe. And I think he will make a very concrete proposal on the COSAC and the rule of law.
Madame la Présidente Tillieu, Monsieur le Président Lénard.
Madam President Tillieu, Mr. Lennertz, Professor Tulkins, members of European and national parliaments. My contribution will be slightly more modest than my colleagues. The question is, how can the national parliaments get involved to a greater extent when it comes to fighting for the rule of law? That is what I would like to talk to you about in this very brief speech. Over recent years, the EU has tried to respond to the crisis of the rule of law. They have used a number of different mechanisms to do this. A large part of these mechanisms for national parliaments, they had a very minor or non-existent role. Looking at the experience, the expertise, the legitimacy of national parliaments, it seems that a strengthened role for these national parliaments is certainly desirable. Looking at the different options available, a better use of the mechanism of the rule of law offers interesting possibilities. If we look at the last report from COSAC, and Mr. Joilou reminded of this, this report was analysed and debated across the national parliaments. I think that is certainly to be welcomed. So, on the basis of this, my proposal would be that national parliaments strengthen their strategic use of these reports, and this done beforehand as well as after the fact. Before the information is collected by the Commission, and here I'm echoing some of the thoughts from Commissioner Reinders, when you look at the explanation of the methodology that is used, you can see that the Commission is addressing itself to the member states. In numerous countries, it is often the executive, civil society that looks at these reports. The national parliaments could more systematically participate in this process and to indicate their views on the situation. It is often from the executive that you find the origin of attacks on rule of law in the member states. It would be more prudent that the legislative branch acts and contributes to give a more a clearer picture of the situation. If we take the example of Belgium, for example, participation of the federal parliament and the federated bodies in Belgium, this would give a clearer picture of the thousands of legal decisions that have condemned the Belgian state to not provide adequate hosting conditions for refugees. Now, this is mentioned in the report, but it's only 7 lines over 30 pages. I think an intervention of the Parliament might have meant that this was given a more prominent position. in addition to having a greater role before the report is drafted, afterwards they could help for a more systematic follow-up when it comes to the European Commission's recommendations. By using the report, you can make these into real national issues that are debated in those parliaments. And I think COSAC has a role to play here. COSAC can become a place where we have an exchange of good practices between the national assemblies, for example, looking at how national parliaments deal with these reports or the political consequences that they draw from those. Now, this will be my last point. COSAC could also feedback to the European Commission, looking on improvements that could be made in terms of the methodology and the scope of the report on the rule of law. From a methodological point of view, it would be better to take into account the gravity or the systematic nature of the violations. When you read the reports, there's a whole series of violations, but you don't know if these are things that happen systematically, if they're more serious or less serious. And so sometimes it can trivialize some of these violations of rule of law. So I think if we incorporated the intensity or the seriousness of these violations, that would be an added value. So we can make that clearer. When it comes to the scope, as the European Parliament said in its resolution of the 28th of February this year, it is clear that this report should cover all of the values that fall under Article 2 of the treaty. That goes along the lines of Mr. Lennart's proposal. The values in Article 2 cannot be dissociated from one another. They are all interlinked. And finally, a country-by-country approach is useful, but it doesn't really tackle those transnational issues such as organised crime, corruption or money laundering, for example. Ladies and gentlemen, and I shall conclude with this point, I think it would also be very useful if this mechanism is given a more legal status. So if this is inscribed into legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. van Weyenberghe, for your very concrete suggestions to improve the rule of law reporting and enhancing the role of COSAC in this process. There are many questions, many probably not related to what Mr. van Weyenberghe has said, but nevertheless we can try. There are some people who have asked the floor for a long time. A lady here with number 192.
Thanks very much. The Commission today talks about the rule of law being a priority, but the fact is that many member states are not working with the interests of the rule of law at heart. If you look at the various reports, you can see that this is happening. There are violations of the rule of law. And so, looking at the most recent developments in Greece, my country, where there's been a systematic violation of the rule of law over the last few years, I was wondering what are the institutional tools that the Commission and the Parliament can have to stop this kind of thing happening. We are really in trouble as far as the rule of the independence of journalists is concerned, for example. We've got Predator Gate, the spyware, which was aimed at journalists and opposition politicians, but Europe needs to look at these issues because more and more of these things are happening. The question of organised crime as well. And the European Commission has debated the issue, but we can't allow these things to continue. We really need to see that the Laura Covesi, the prosecutor, is going to look into these things, it seems, and that will be very good for European justice. These things are included in a European Parliament report on the rule of law and freedom of the press in Greece. These things need to be fostered if the rule of law is going to be protected. The question is, what's the Commission doing? What is the Parliament doing?
Precise question. I have another number on my list, 484. Number.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, sorry, I was looking in the wrong direction.
Well, as a professional journalist for 35 years and being a member of the Parliament National Assembly for 10 years, I simply want to underline the correlation between the Turkey's voyage to Europe and my personal career. When things went well between Turkey and Europe, we enjoyed the freedom of speech and also rule of law in my country. But after the stall in 2016, while I was a member of parliament, my immunity was lifted. I have been sentenced to lifetime and served a prison time for almost 2 years. During this process, the European Union, European Parliament, in short, Europe, did not leave me or my colleagues alone, and several statements, protests took place. But since then, times have changed, and in favor of the opposition, I would say. Last year, 50% of the voters have voted for the opposition coalition. But unfortunately, it's my first time in this parliament. I witnessed that my country's name was mentioned only once or twice. Turkey is a candidate for almost 25 years. So I kindly, but also strongly recommend the floor that the necessary solidarity for Turkey's will of democracy should not be neglected, and European friends with the critics or encouragements should show some solidarity with our adventure, I would say, becoming a democratic, secular, and European model of state, as described as our founding father, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, founder of the country and of my party, described 100 years ago. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Teşekkür. And there's one gentleman standing over there.
Ça marche. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. COSAC was created 35 years ago. 35 years ago, we saw the birth of internet and access to free information, and we saw the reunification of peoples with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And all of this gave us hope for citizens to gain access to all the information they needed to take their decisions wisely based on the information. However, now the situation looks rather dark. We see that we Europeans are also vulnerable to foreign influence. The 2007 elections, the Brexit vote, and the deepfakes that came out just 48 hours before the poll. And there was a clear condemnation of Europe becoming targets for disinformation. My own small country, which is very much attached to its democratic values, feels this is a major issue. My small country feels that this is a key question. It's up to us to really prioritise this battle so that we can safeguard our own lives and the lives of our children. We need to remain proactive and safeguard the freedom of decision-making, the free will of our citizens and fellow citizens. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm looking to Mr. Reinders. Perhaps he would like to respond to this question on Greece.
Un mot brièvement sur chacun des points. D'abord,
well, briefly on those points on Greece.
Because the question was also in English, maybe. But about Greece, you will read again in the report on the rule of law this year in July our assessment about all the reforms and the evolution in Greece. I want first to insist on the fact that when there are some discussions about criminal cases in different ways, of course, it's first of all a responsibility of the internal institutions. So we are working with the Data Protection Authority in Greece. When you spoke about spyware, we are following the different investigations in justice with the prosecutor office and then maybe the trials. And it's possible to react at the end of the process. What will be very important maybe in the future to have a better approach on some situations also at the EU level, it's what I've said about the Open Public Prosecutor Office, and you have mentioned that. So it will be important to have the capacity to act at the EU level in criminal cases, and maybe in the near future we'll have the capacity to see the European Union organizing its own accession to the Open Court of Human Rights. And there it will be possible not only to challenge the national decisions, but also the open decisions before the Open Court of Human Rights. That will be an important element. About Turkey, just to say that we are open to discuss with all the different stakeholders and certainly all the different political parties in the different member states. So we are not only in contact with the government, the majority, but also with the opposition. And it was said by the President Lennart, of course, protection of minorities, it's an important element of the rule of law. And last point, simplement à propos de la désinformation.
On disinformation, having heard Monica's comment, we're working ever harder on disinformation. It's a major concern for us with looking ahead to the European elections, but not only the European elections, with many other elections coming up, especially the way digital technologies can be used to influence decision-making. We have adopted a whole host of legal texts now in recent years to try and set out a framework for the way we use digital technologies, whether it's AI or other areas. So this is a nascent area, and we're taking measures now. Well, I have a question, Mr. to you, Van Wijn, since nobody's asking questions to the experts. Maybe I should ask for a point of clarification. When you say we need to boost the role of national parliaments, but surely MPs are either in government or in the opposition. Isn't there a risk that the Parliament will issue a report that favours the government concerned, so the government, and that it will lack a critical perspective?
Thank you very much for this question. It is, of course, a risk, but I hold parliaments in high esteem. I think it is more than just a place to rubber stamp the decisions of the executive. I think there is an inherent value to parliamentary work, and its oversight of the executive is a keystone of our modern democracies. I think when it comes to this oversight function, there's also a check on the data that's being provided to international organizations or the EU. So I do not think it is impossible to imagine that a parliament could play its role, could do so in a very thorough way, and perhaps create a system of checks and balances if the executive provides a too favourable view of the situation. Thank you for having clarified this aspect of your proposal. Mr. Lennartz, I think you wanted to react?
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je voudrais tout d'abord appuyer fort.
Yes, thank you. Can I just second what Mr. Van Wijnberg said? Because everything he says holds true. But in the European Parliament case, we don't have this opposition versus government dichotomy. And so this is something that doesn't... that we're not subjected to, this opposition between majority and minority. But that's just an aside. What I would like to say is the questions that were put to Mr. Tolkens, all of those are related to access to judges. Well, all of that is essential. But the respect of the rule of law and independent justice means that you have three aspects to it. First off, guarantee to judges. Then, secondly, the equitable judicial proceedings. And thirdly, the proper implementation of legal decisions and rulings. And so I stress this point because within the European Union, we're seeing with each treaty revision, the member states have sharpened the constraint mechanisms when it came to the implementation of the court rulings. But that makes sense because the member states trust one another to respect common rules. And in the event of a dispute, it's the Court of Justice that's going to rule on the respect of these rules. And if it was found that the rules were not respected, then it'll be once again up to the court to ensure that the member states align to the common rules. And that's why the court is extremely strict when a member state fails to respect a ruling from the court. The Court of Justice can impose a flat rate fine, can apply a fine in the event of a non-respect of an internal ruling. And then further measures can be taken where ongoing regular payments are imposed on the member state for which fails to align itself. And such financial penalties are simply withheld by the European Commission from amounts that are due to the member state in question. So that constraint is necessary, as in any legal system. As I said in my introduction, Alexander Hamilton said that justice is the least threatening branch of government because it doesn't have the power of the executive. Indeed, the executive turns to the Court of Justice to impose financial sanctions. So mutual trust is strengthened in this way, and by the mere fact that member states have to trust each other mutually.
Everybody who didn't have the opportunity to speak during this debate, you can put entirely the blame on me. You can always blame the media, but we're independent, so I couldn't care less. So with this, I give the floor to Eliane Tillieu, President of the Chamber, the Kamer in Belgium, for some closing remarks maybe, or for the next program.
Hartelijk bedankt. Peut-être pour clôturer.
To close the panel, it's always very frustrating, of course, that we have to cut short a debate on issues as important as the rule of law. So I do hope that I'll be allowed to give 30 seconds for each member of the panel just to make some closing observations so that we can bring this debate to a close very quickly.
pour clôturer, Madame Tulkens. Oui, oui.
Well, Ms. Tulkens.
Très bien, mais moi, ce que j'ai envie de dire, c'est...
Well, very briefly, what I'd like to say is, yes, we can keep talking about the rule of law, human rights, democracy, but as someone else said, and I agree with it, we need to identify the problems and say so in our reports. We can't simply regurgitate general statements on democracy, the rule of law, and so on. We need to point the finger to tangible, real problems that exist. And I don't think we should have an excess or lack of hope. We need to be vigilant, quite simply put. A perfect society will never exist, and that's a good thing.
Je voudrais ajouter que le respect de l'état de droit pour les
And let me just add that the respect of the rule of law for the member states of the EU, it is an obligation in terms of the results. A member state cannot use its national identity to stand apart or to avoid the common understanding of what the rule of law is. This is something which is so key, because without this common vision of the respect of the legal rules of the EU, the member states will have no mutual trust. That mutual trust is very important when it comes to mutual recognitions of legal decisions from the respective national jurisdictions. That is really the keystone of liberty, security and justice. Think about the European arrest warrant, for example. Think about civil and commercial legal decisions, asylum and migration decisions, and so many more. Without the respect of the rule of law at a European level, that is something that won't be lasting without the rule of law. So this is something that between the member states, this common legal order, that's something which is very important. It's something that started 70 years ago.
La confiance mutuelle, oui, une utopie, mais une utopie...
Mutual trust, yes, utopia, but a real, genuine utopia. What struck me, listening to what everyone said today, was that there's people want more Europe. Not just any old Europe, not a Europe of goods, but a Europe of values. What I see today is that the ECJ gives us a chance to be braver with its case law. We've heard about what's been done in Portugal. We've heard about 2 rulings on conditionality. I think that there is a kind of nursery where there's a possibility of recourse to the ECJ. The treaties have an Article 259 of the TFEU, which allows not the Commission, it can still obviously do it as it sees fit, but member states can put other states before the court if they fail to act. So you can act, don't forget, under 259 for violating the values of the European Union. It doesn't have to be the Commission that does it. You can do it yourself. Thank you.
Pour européenne des droits de l'homme, on peut faire aussi une requête interétatique. Article 33 de la...
There's also Article 33 of the Convention that's underused.
Peut-être essayer d'être très concret pour la COSAC. No.
Well, maybe I can just be very concrete when it comes to COSAC and the national parliaments. We're talking about this annual rule of law report. The next one will come out in July. There are now recommendations that are included. So why not, in each national parliament, organise a debate with regards to these recommendations, invite the different stakeholders, including civil society. There is no reason not to have a debate where the national authorities have to explain why it's simple to put in place a recommendation, or why sometimes it takes a lot of time and it's more difficult. So it's something which is very tangible, and I think it's something that could be a common approach in the national parliaments, which are part of this work on rule of law. So the 27 member states, the 4 candidate countries I mentioned earlier, so it would be something very tangible that you could come back to in the next COSAC meeting on the rule of law.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Herbout.
Thank you, Mr. Herbout, and the members of the panel. Obviously, Mr. Commissioner, thank you as well. The ladies and gentlemen who are on the panel, the President of the ECJ, the Vice President of the CHR, and you, Professor, for what you said, and the tricky task we all had. I'd like to thank Mr. Herbout for running the panel. It's a method we don't use all that often, but it was a bit livelier, I think, even if it's frustrating for those people who didn't get a chance to take the floor or to speak for as long as they wanted. So since European integration began, Belgium's played a key role in European enhanced integration, and human rights are vitally important for us, and the respect for the rule of law is vitally important. It links us all together. It's vital for political stability and for economic progress. It's underpinning the union, but some people have called it into question. The aggressive war of Russia against Ukraine means, or shows us, that we need to defend our values clearly, and I hope that we'll be able to continue to count on your support so that we can promote the rule of law in national parliaments and continue to talk to the European Commission and governments as well as civil society. And I'll give the floor now to my colleague.
Sans transition, chers collègues, il est...
Well, without further ado, it is now time to begin the final section of our meeting. The discussion of the conclusions as discussed by the COSAC committee yesterday. Those were circulated, and there was a technical addendum on paragraph 12. Following the discussions of the amendments and the draft wording, at the request of delegations from the Bundestag and Bundesrat, there will be a footnote on the chapter dealing with the Middle East, stating that they cannot support that section of the draft. Are there any further delegations wishing to make any comments?
La Suède.
La Suède.
Tack, svenska.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say that we are very pleased and glad to be part of a common European family, and I would like to thank the Belgian presidency for having organised this here in Brussels. It is very important to strengthen democracy and the rule of law. This is something that should shape our draft contributions. Now, having said that, I think it is unfortunate that we can't have a unanimous vote on this final document, 15, 17, whatever it might be. I think it's a shame we can't have a unanimity. It seems a bit unfortunate to base this decision on a 3/4 majority. Now, we represent 4 quite different political groups. I think it is important to have an inclusive process so everyone can feel ownership of this. I think it is a shame that our differences split us. Hopefully the next presidency can find a way to have a more inclusive process that can strengthen our Europe. That's what we really need, is unity. That's something that we should look for in our actions, in our documents. We should look for consensus. We don't want to put a specific note in the minutes, but we do want to make it very clear here in plenary that we want a process based on consensus and unity in Europe. Thank you very much.
En effet, l'unité est importante.
Yes, in fact, unity is important. And we need to be able to take into account various changes. Any comments?
La Grèce.
Greece, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Without wanting to create any procedural difficulties, and I was very impressed with the way the top table has handled things during this meeting. Following on from the comments of our Swedish colleague, I'd like to stress that in each case we did come up with a text for conclusions yesterday, and on number 12 we had a specific text in mind yesterday. Now we've got a different text presented to us which, as far as we're concerned, substantially changes the content of point 12. I just wanted to make that and get it into the minutes. Thank you very much indeed.
Nous actons. Pas d'autres remarques?
It's minuted, thank you. No further comments? Well, in that case...
OK. Czechy et puis
Děkuji za slovo.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Czech delegation, I would like to say that we would like to join the reservation of the German Bundestag, and we have serious reservations against the part about the Near East. We would like to state this for the minutes, just like the German delegation. Thank you.
Nous l'actons, c'est bien noté. L'Espagne.
We've noted that as well. Spain.
Muchas gracias.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman. On behalf of the Spanish delegation, let me thank the Belgian presidency for its sterling efforts in order to seek consensus and in supporting COSAC activities. So we do understand that sometimes we should be looking to adopt shorter documents, shorter texts, and perhaps take a more general approach. But in other areas, we might want to just rely on the expertise from academies and institutes that have specific knowledge as regards Article 58. Now, on behalf of the Spanish delegation, we would simply like to express our full trust and confidence in COSAC and its work, and we need to continue to have this forum for debate so that national parliaments can reinforce and strengthen the integration process. So just my words of thanks, not only to the Belgian presidency, but also the Hungarian presidency, the Swedish presidency, for the work you did in the Troika, and obviously wishing well to the Hungarian presidency to continue this work. And also my thanks to the Secretariat.
Monsieur, voilà.
Thank you.
Très bien. Voilà. Encore.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask if it's possible what yesterday was presented by our colleague from Ukraine, Ivana Klimpush-Tsintsadze, her speech, that it would be, I don't know whether it's an official document or it is in the minutes in the protocol of the meeting, but maybe we could make a reference in one of those our documents, reference to Ivana's speech. Sorry, maybe out of the blue, but you know, to put into to a set of official documents what she has said.
Voilà, ce sera évidemment repris dans.
Obviously, the proceedings will contain a reference to it, as we normally do. So thanks very much, colleagues. I declare the two drafts as adopted, as amended. The conclusion of the 71st COSAC will be sent to the European institutions. Let me now give the floor to our Hungarian colleague, who's going to tell us about the Hungarian presidency, the date of the next COSAC meeting. Go ahead, Mr. Tessili.
President, dear colleagues, thank you very much for giving me the word. And now I'd say the following. From the 1st of July 2024, Hungary will assume the rotating presidency of the European Union. Therefore, after the first semester of 2011, for the second time, Hungary will assume the role of the presidency. It will be an interesting semester and interesting time, because we will have to work with the newly elected European Parliament during interparliamentary events. The Hungarian presidency will invite you for the COSAC meeting for the 28th and 29th of July in 2024. And the venue is our beautiful Hungarian Parliament at the Danube, at the river Danube. As the plenary meeting of the 72nd COSAC meeting, which will also take place between the 27th and 29th of July. On this plenary meeting, we will talk about the demographic situation in Europe, expectations and perspectives, and also questions of labor market and competitivity. One of our most important priorities is linked to enlargement and also to the Western Balkans, so we will talk about these issues as well. And of course, you will have plenty of opportunities to enjoy leisure activities. So we hope and trust that the members of the COSAC will have a nice time in Hungary and will have a fruitful debate about Europe, about the strengthening of the member states, as well as about peace and security. Thank you very much for your attention. So I'd repeat the dates, because the colleagues said that I did not exactly say it properly. So the presidency meeting of COSAC will be on the 28th and 29th of July, and the 72nd plenary meeting will take place between the 27th and 29th of October 2014.
Chers amis, pour conclure, j'aimerais vous remercier pour votre attention.
Well, thank you for taking part actively in our debates. I've been in all COSAC meetings since 2020, which has allowed me to take part in fascinating discussions and have discussions with very interesting colleagues. The federal and regional elections in June this year, so this is the last meeting I'll be taking part in. It was a great pleasure for me, at least, and an honour for me to take part in this interparliamentary adventure, I beg your pardon, with you. And let me now give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Thieu, for the final words.
Nous voici effectivement au terme de notre réunion. Je voudrais vous remercier toutes et tous pour votre participation active à la réflexion.
Thank you very much for your participation. So thank you on behalf of the Belgian federal government for the organisation of this colleague. So I thank the Deputy Secretary of State. I thank all of our speakers. I would also like to thank the European Commission. Thank you for having participated in this debate. I thank Nicolas Schmid, Thierry Breton, Didier Renders. Thank you very much for strengthening this dialogue with national parliaments. thank you to the political representatives of the European Commission, the representatives of the Belgian federal government, who have made very interesting and constructive contributions. The conflict in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, the environmental problems, the problems in Africa have a considerable issue and have affected the rule of law in the EU as well. That was more and more under pressure. This is part of the societal challenges and pressures that we face, and that has characterised the Belgian presidency of the EU. I have worked together with the co-president, Mr. Goitsenhoven, to deal with the important political and social issues. Following the meeting of the presidents of the COSAC in Namur, the European Social Pillar of Rights came under particular scrutiny. Following this plenary session of the COSAC, it is clear that when it comes to the discussion of gender policy, that it's important to talk about representation of women and men in parliaments. Together with the Belgian Senate, I think it's important to have better gender representation in our committees. We need to have the best representation of society and allow all people to have access to representative roles and related functions. It's important that national parliaments draw up and adopt action plans on gender equality, as well as budgets that take into account gender equality in all areas. I would also like to welcome the declaration of the presidents with regards to gender equality adopted in February for gender equality of the European Union. This is something that will be dealt with by the European Commission on the rule of law. I would like to ask you to come and co-sign the common declaration to try and have parliaments that are more aware of gender equality. COSAC will be an important part of that. Due to the closing of the fourth session, I made a reference to rule of law. We heard from Mrs. Klimpuch-Sinse from the Ukrainian Parliament. That was a very interesting speech. We saw the courage of Ukrainian women against Russian aggression that showed the importance of democracy and rule of law.
TEPSA and Egmont Institute are organizing on the sidelines of the plenary session of COSAC a lunch debate on the theme Innovating Democracy, the link between national democracy and European democracy. Finally, I would like to thank all those who contributed to the success of the plenary session of the COSAC, which concludes the parliamentary dimension of the Belgian presidency of the European Union. I particularly want to thank the services of the Federal Parliament and the European Parliament, the interpreters and the COSAC Secretariat for their support in making this conference a success. In barely 10 weeks, we will have the elections for the European Parliament. These elections coincide with the Belgian elections for the Federal Parliament and the regional assemblies, as 24 is indeed an election year where many of us will have to present ourselves to the voters again. I wish you all a successful campaign. Thank you for coming and contributing to the debate.